Prepare yourself for a one-way journey into the unknown. Tonight we will cross the threshold of logic to delve into mysteries so deep they might change the way you see reality. Over the next few hours, the improbable will become possible, and the impossible suspiciously close. The Taos Hum. There are sounds that are heard and forgotten. There are noises the wind brings for a second and carries away without leaving a trace. But the Taos Hum does not belong to that kind of sound. It is a deep, persistent murmur, almost like a moan trapped between the mountains of the desert. A whisper that seems to rise from the very ground, that seeps through the walls, through the bones, through those hours of the day when no one speaks and only the sound remains. And the most unsettling part, not everyone hears it. In fact, very few people can hear it. But those who do swear it never leaves them alone again. We are in northern New Mexico, near the town of Taos, a place marked by the arid beauty of the American Southwest. On the surface, it is an artistic and peaceful community, a region that attracts painters, poets, and seekers of peace. But starting in the early 1990s, a story began to surface that would disrupt that calm. Dozens of people reported hearing a persistent sound, a kind of low hum, like the purring of a distant engine, a vibration without a visible or audible source to others. These were not confused tourists or conspiracy fanatics. Many were longtime residents, respected individuals, some even with scientific training. They all agreed on one thing. The sound was not coming from outside. It was coming from somewhere deep, as if rising from within the earth itself, or perhaps from an undetectable point in the air. The phrase, the Taos Hum, quickly gained popularity. It became a phenomenon worthy of national attention and even led to formal investigations. In 1993, a team of researchers from the Los Alamos National Laboratory, along with the University of New Mexico and several government agencies, was sent to the area to record, analyze, and, if possible, explain the source of the sound. They brought high-sensitivity equipment, low-frequency microphones, ground vibration sensors. They interviewed those who heard it, documented the time, intensity, frequency. But the instruments detected nothing unusual. Everything was normal. And yet, the hum continued. The most disconcerting thing was not just that the sound could not be recorded, but that it physically and psychologically affected those who heard it. Some developed chronic insomnia. Others reported anxiety, headaches, nausea. There were those who claimed the sound rose and fell with the lunar tide, or that it intensified during certain seasons of the year. Hypersensitive hearing was mentioned, as well as subjective perception, localized tinnitus. There was speculation about electromagnetic waves from power lines or underground military facilities. But none of these hypotheses could be confirmed with solid data. The possible sources were ruled out one by one, leaving only the most disturbing evidence. The sound was there, but no one could prove its existence with certainty. One characteristic that sets the Taos Hum apart from other acoustic phenomena is its selectivity. Only between 2 and 5% of the local population hears it, according to the most generous studies. These people have been called hearers. The hearers do not know each other, do not live in the same area, do not share age or lifestyle. Some hear it only indoors, others even outdoors. For some, it is continuous. For others, intermittent. Some describe it as a low vibration, like a diesel engine running far away. Others compare it to an industrial frequency vibrating in the chest and skull. Some have gone so far as to sell their homes and move, only to discover that the hum follows them. That is another of its oddities. Sometimes it does not belong to the place, but to the person. As if, once marked by it, one could no longer live without its presence. Science, faced with this phenomenon, has had to shift between skepticism and surrender. Some acoustics experts have proposed that it could be low-frequency emissions from industrial sources hundreds of kilometers away, whose waves travel through the Earth's crust and are amplified by specific geological conditions. Others suggest microwaves, telluric resonances, or even natural piezoelectric reactions in the mineral formations of the region. There is also the theory that it is an induced cerebral perception, a kind of collective auditory hallucination of neurological origin, possibly triggered by environmental stress or psychosocial factors. But none of these theories manages to explain completely why, if it is a physical phenomenon, only certain people can detect it. Do these people have more finely tuned hearing? Or is it an involuntary attunement to a frequency that most human beings have ceased to perceive due to evolution or the saturation of the modern world? On the other side of the spectrum, as often happens with mysteries sustained by uncertainty, the most radical theories have not been lacking. Some claim the hum is a form of interstellar communication, a signal emitted from underground by a non-human intelligence, perhaps related to the Hollow Earth hypothesis or to ancient devices buried by lost civilizations. Others speak of a military experiment gone wrong, a covert mind control signal, an acoustic manipulation of collective consciousness. The truth is that none of these versions can be entirely ruled out, partly because no one has been able to offer a definitive scientific explanation. And where certainty is absent, imagination flourishes. One of the most puzzling aspects of the hum is how it has been replicated in other parts of the world. From Canada to Scotland, from Australia to South Korea, nearly identical acoustic phenomena to the one in Taos have been reported. Some of these occurrences date back earlier, suggesting that the phenomenon is not new but simply ignored or misinterpreted for centuries. In earlier times, did people not speak of the groans of the earth, of voices from the underworld, of the roar of spirits? Perhaps the Taos hum is merely the modern version of an ancestral perception we now try to tame with scientific names. Even the indigenous peoples of the area, such as the Taos Pueblo, have legends about sacred vibrations perceived only at certain times of the year, associated with spiritual portals or energies awakened in the land. It is not far-fetched to think that what we now call the hum was already perceived by those who inhabited those lands before any device could record a single frequency. But perhaps the greatest mystery of the Taos hum is not in its origin, or its nature, or even its physical existence. Perhaps the real mystery lies in what it provokes in us, a feeling of dissonance with reality, as if something is whispering to us from the edge of comprehension, a frequency we are not meant to hear, and yet it is there, insistent, intermittent, elusive. In the end, the hum may not be just an acoustic phenomenon, but a symptom of something deeper, an echo reminding us that the world still holds secrets that neither technology nor reason can resolve. A reminder that, even surrounded by data, we still do not know everything, that there are vibrations which escape the common ear, but touch that part of us where mystery is still possible. And while someone, in some corner of Taos, lies down tonight feeling that inexplicable purring in their bones, the hum will still be there, persistent, like a note that has not yet finished sounding. The enigma of the cold spot of the universe. There are regions of the universe that feel like cosmic silences, spaces that seem to have been forgotten by creation itself, and that in their apparent stillness contain more questions than stars. Among all the mysteries revealed through observation of the cosmos, one stands out not for what it shows, but for what it hides. A vast area of the sky where the universe seems to have cooled without any reason. It is known as the cold spot, a thermal anomaly detected in the cosmic microwave background, that fossil echo of the Big Bang that still vibrates in every direction, like the oldest whisper of existence. It is a void that should not be there, a cosmic hollow that has led scientists, cosmologists, and thinkers to reconsider not only the laws that govern the expansion of the universe, but even the very possibility that we are not alone in this space-time fabric, and that perhaps we might be sharing it with parallel realities. It all begins in the year 2004, when data sent by the WMAP satellite, one of the most ambitious missions to map the cosmic microwave background, revealed something unexpected. In a region of the sky located in the constellation Eridanus, the sensors detected an unusually cold expanse. It was not just a slight drop in temperature. It was an area significantly colder than any other part of the observed sky, far beyond the range that would allow for statistical chance. The cosmic background, that thermal map of how energy was distributed just after the Big Bang, is surprisingly homogeneous, with small temperature fluctuations that vary only by millionths of a degree. But the cold spot broke that pattern. It measured about 1 billion light-years across, and its temperature was lower than expected within a range that no standard model of cosmology could predict. At first, it was thought that the phenomenon might be explained as a random fluctuation, an imperfection in the map, a fault in the measuring instruments. But years later, when the Planck satellite, an even more advanced mission, again mapped the cosmic background with greater precision, the cold spot was still there, unchanged. It was not a mistake, nor a technical artifact, nor a momentary anomaly. It was real. And it became increasingly clear that the explanation would require much more than a data review. Scientists began working on hypotheses. The first and most conservative pointed to a supervoid, a region of the universe simply less dense, with less matter, and therefore colder. In theory, if a large region of space contains fewer galaxies, fewer stars, less dark matter, that could cause the background radiation to stretch more as it passes through, losing energy and becoming colder along the way. The problem was that although cosmic voids were known, those natural bubbles between galactic filaments, none were large enough to explain the cooling observed in the cold spot. For this hypothesis to work, there would have to be a void so enormous, so extraordinarily devoid of matter, that it would far exceed any known structure in the universe. Something that, in itself, would already be an anomaly. Then other possibilities began to emerge. Some remained within the bounds of theoretical physics, like the idea that the cold spot could be the result of an interaction with a different cosmic topology, a kind of unusual curvature in space-time that alters the propagation of light. Other proposals went further and began to touch on areas that border on speculative science. One of the most unsettling was formulated by a team of researchers at Durham University who proposed an extraordinary theory. The cold spot could be the result of a collision with another universe. This idea, which in any other context might seem like a work of science fiction, stems from the inflationary theory of the multiverse. According to this perspective, during the first moments of the Big Bang, multiple bubbles of universes may have formed, each with its own physical laws, its own dimensions, even its own time. If one of those bubbles had collided with ours in the early moments of its expansion, that collision would have left a mark on the cosmic microwave background. And that mark could be precisely a zone of anomalous cooling, a trace of a collision between realities. This hypothesis is fascinating not only for its content, but for what it implies. Because if it is true, the cold spot would not simply be a darker void in the sky. It would be a scar in the fabric of the universe, physical evidence that there are other worlds beyond ours, coexisting in different planes. And the most disturbing part? The collision already happened, in a past so remote that we cannot conceive of it in human terms, but its mark is still there, visible each night in a point of the sky. It is a silent mark of a history that does not entirely belong to us, but that contains us. The philosophical consequences of this possibility are immense. If the universe is just a bubble in an infinite ocean of other universes, how much of the visible cosmos is truly comprehensible to us? How many laws, particles, structures, and energies escape our understanding because they simply do not belong to our fabric of reality? And what would happen if a new collision were on its way? If another bubble were approaching ours and there were nothing we could do to prevent it? Of course, these ideas remain highly speculative. There is no direct way, at least for now, to prove that the cold spot is the result of an interdimensional collision. But there is also no convincing explanation that can rule out that option. In the meantime, astronomers continue observing that region with all kinds of instruments: optical telescopes, X-ray detectors, studies of galactic distribution. Nothing seems to behave in a particularly anomalous way, and yet the cold persists, like a whisper that contradicts everything we think we know about the expansion of the universe. Some schools of thought have begun to see the cold spot as a symbol of something deeper. The idea that there are zones in the universe where the rules change, where the very structure of reality bends, twists, or simply breaks. These are places where the universe seems to observe itself and discover that it does not fully understand itself. In that sense, the cold spot is a boundary, not a physical boundary, not even one visible to the naked eye, but a boundary of knowledge. A region that marks the limit between what we can explain and what still resists all logic. It is possible that one day, hundreds or thousands of years from now, future civilizations will look back and remember the discovery of the cold spot as one of those moments when humanity glimpsed, for an instant, the vastness of the unknown. Because if this phenomenon leaves us with anything, beyond any cosmological model, it is the certainty that the universe still holds secrets that cannot fit into any equation. Secrets that confront us not only with the literal cold of a region of the sky, but also with the symbolic void of our own limitations. And there, between that impossible coldness and that immense silence, something remains. Something that perhaps we are not yet prepared to understand. But that, night after night, continues watching us from a region of the sky where nothing should exist. And yet, something is there. The voices from space, radio signals without a source. In the deepest reaches of the cosmos, beyond the dance of galaxies and the fading pulses of dying stars, there exists a constant murmur that permeates the universe like an unending echo. It is a chaotic symphony of frequencies, as if space itself were breathing with bursts of invisible energy. Amidst that background noise, scientists have found something that defies all reason. Radio signals that appear without warning, without any identifiable origin, and without a logical explanation. They are brief bursts, sometimes as intense as an entire galaxy, that emerge for seconds and then vanish without a trace. Their existence is a fact, but their cause remains one of the great mysteries of modern astrophysics. For many, these emissions are simply an astrophysical phenomenon not yet understood. For others, they are the whispers of a distant intelligence, a civilization that may not be trying to speak, but is being heard. The story of this mystery begins in a discreet, almost anecdotal way. It was the year 1977 when Jerry Amon, a volunteer from the SETI project, the initiative dedicated to the search for extraterrestrial intelligence, was reviewing data captured by the Big Ear radio telescope in Ohio. Amid tons of numbers and letters, he found a 6-character sequence that stood out above everything else. 6EQUJ5. It was a powerful, precise signal that appeared as an anomaly within the tangle of natural emissions. It lasted only 72 seconds and never repeated. Jerry, impressed by the clarity of the phenomenon, wrote, "Wow," in the margin of the printed paper. Since then, it has been known as the WOW signal, an event that remains unexplained to this day. For decades, scientists have tried to replicate that observation, scan the same region of the sky, find a similar signal. Nothing. The WOW signal appeared once and then vanished forever. Various theories were proposed. Satellite reflections, terrestrial transmissions bounced off the atmosphere, astronomical phenomena not yet understood. But no hypothesis matches the intensity and frequency parameters that this emission showed. It was too perfect, too clean, as if it had been deliberately aimed at our planet from some distant point. Yet, without repetition, it cannot be considered solid evidence of a non-human intelligence. And so, the signal became a legend. But it was not an isolated case. Decades later, in 2007, a group of astronomers from West Virginia University, while analyzing data from the Parkes radio telescope in Australia, found something unsettling. A fast radio burst, which lasted only a few milliseconds, but released in that very brief moment as much energy as the sun does in several days. The explosion was sharp, intense, and completely inexplicable. In the following years, other similar bursts began to appear in different parts of the sky. They were given a technical but chilling name: FRBs, fast radio bursts. The nature of these signals is, in itself, a puzzle. They appear without warning, in different parts of the sky, with frequencies that vary, intensities that defy what is known, and in many cases, without any apparent pattern. Some are unique, others repeat at erratic intervals, as if someone, or something, were sending messages in a language we still cannot decipher. Human sources have been rigorously ruled out. They are not interferences from phones, satellites, or terrestrial instruments. The signals come from deep space, sometimes from galaxies more than 1 billion light-years away. The time it takes them to reach us is so immense that the original source, whatever it may be, could have ceased to exist eons ago. Traditional astrophysical models have proposed several explanations: collisions between neutron stars, magnetar explosions, black holes violently devouring matter. And yes, some FRBs may have that origin, but others do not fit. Some repeat with too precise regularity. One particularly puzzling case was the FRB 111102 signal, a burst discovered in 2012, and since then detected dozens of times. This signal comes from a dwarf galaxy located more than 3 billion light-years away. What makes it special is its behavior. It appears in cycles, with pauses, as if it followed a mechanism. In 2020, researchers detected an almost mathematical periodicity: 90 days of silence, then 67 days of activity. A cadence that eerily resembles a designed pattern. Amid this enigma, some astrophysicists have raised the possibility, without directly claiming it but leaving it open, that certain FRBs might be manifestations of advanced technologies. Avi Loeb, a Harvard astrophysicist and one of the most outspoken advocates for serious exploration of intelligent life beyond Earth, has suggested that certain signals could be leakage from large-scale energy transmitters. In other words, that an extremely advanced civilization might be using energy beams to propel spacecraft at relativistic speeds, and what we are detecting are echoes of that process. These kinds of proposals inevitably clash with the skepticism of the dominant scientific paradigm. Science, by its nature, avoids assuming intent where causality cannot be proven. But even the most orthodox are forced to acknowledge that some FRBs seem designed to mock our understanding. A clear example was the detection, in 2022, of a signal with a strange modulation that resembled a signature, as if someone had encoded a type of energy signature into the transmission. The research team named it the rhythmic signal, and although its pulses were tentatively attributed to an unknown astrophysical source, their regularity was such that more than one scientist, in private, admitted that it seemed artificial. And this is where one of the deepest questions of the mystery arises. What does a signal without a source mean? Is it possible that we are picking up messages whose sender no longer exists, or worse, that never intended to communicate with us? On the scale of the universe, time does not pass as it does in our human experience. We may be hearing the echo of a civilization extinguished millions of years ago, or picking up fragments of a language that does not include us. Or perhaps, what we are receiving are not messages at all, but reflections of an intelligence that does not communicate as we understand it. A consciousness that does not speak with words or symbols, but with energy. There are also philosophical interpretations of the phenomenon. Some argue that the universe is full of life, but the temporal and spatial chasm between civilizations makes contact impossible. Others believe we are alone, and that the signals are, like many other things in nature, phenomena without apparent meaning. But between those extremes lies a fertile ground where mystery grows. That of intelligences that do not seek to be discovered, but simply exist, doing their work in silence, like elemental forces of another level. And when we hear them, we do so accidentally, like someone peeking through a door that should not be open. Today, at the most advanced radio astronomy facilities on the planet, from the Arecibo radio telescopes to the gigantic FAST in China, scientists keep listening. The global observatory network has become more precise, more sensitive. But with every advance, the mystery deepens. The signals do not repeat with the obedience of a simple artificial pattern. They slip away, change, go silent for years, and then return. As if the universe spoke in code, and we could only capture a loose syllable every millennium. Perhaps the greatest enigma of these voices from space is that, in hearing them, we do not know whether we are witnessing a conversation, or if we are the ones who have been heard first. Because it may be that the act of receiving a signal is, in itself, a form of response. And while we continue scanning the sky, hoping that one of those bursts repeats, lengthens, or reveals its source, the universe keeps speaking in its electric language. A language we do not yet understand, but one we continue trying to decipher, night after night. The Voynich Manuscript. Amid the shadows of history, in the silent libraries where time seems to have stopped among dusty shelves, there are certain objects that emit a mystery that never wears out. Objects whose very presence is unsettling, as if their origin defied the rules of human logic. Of all of them, perhaps the most bewildering is a book. An old volume with yellowed pages, covered with strange botanical illustrations, female bodies in inexplicable scenes, circular diagrams reminiscent of star maps or cosmic clocks, and above all, a language. A language no one has been able to decipher. This book exists. It can be seen. It can be leafed through. But it cannot be read. It is the Voynich Manuscript, a work that has puzzled cryptographers, linguists, historians, and scientists for over a century, without anyone being able to crack its code. The story of this manuscript begins, at least officially, in the year 1912, when Wilfrid Voynich, a Polish-born collector of rare books and antiquarian, found it among a series of volumes acquired from an old Jesuit library at Via Mondragone, near Rome. From the first moment, he knew he had something out of the ordinary in his hands. The book, which consists of over 200 illustrated pages, though it is believed there were originally more, is written in a completely unknown writing system. Each page is covered with fluid and elegant lines of text, composed of characters that do not resemble any known alphabet, ancient or modern. The letters have a strange harmony, as if the language had well-defined grammatical rules, a syntax, an inner rhythm, but no one, absolutely no one, has managed to identify what it is. The language of the Voynich Manuscript has been described as one of the most complex codes ever faced, and that says a lot in a world where governments have spent centuries perfecting the art of cryptography. From World War II to the digital era, some of the most brilliant code breakers on the planet have tackled this text, including analysts from the United States National Security Agency, mathematicians from prestigious universities, and experts in dead languages. All have failed, not because the code is unbreakable, but because it is not even clear whether there is a code to begin with. Some patterns seem to repeat as if the text made sense, as if behind its symbols there were a structured, coherent language. But at the same time, the repetitions are so exact, so constant, that some have come to think it is an elaborate hoax, a gibberish designed to look like a real language, without being one. However, to dismiss the manuscript as a fraud is to ignore the detail with which it was constructed. The illustrations, for example, are not mere decorations. They seem to correspond to thematic chapters, There is a botanical section where each page shows a different plant, many of which are impossible to identify. Some appear to be combinations of real species, others have roots or stems that defy natural forms. Then there is the astronomical section, with circular diagrams that resemble medieval zodiacs, although their signs do not match ours exactly. There are depictions of moons, stars, celestial spheres spinning in patterns no one has managed to decipher. There is also a so-called biological section where naked female figures appear, submerged in greenish liquids, connected by tubes, wells, strange organic structures, as if they were participating in some alchemical ritual or medical treatment impossible to classify. Each of these sections seems to be written in the same language, the same system of characters that, to this day, remains completely undeciphered. And this is where the manuscript becomes truly disturbing. Because if it were a medieval invention, as some have suggested, why would someone go to the trouble of creating such a complex and coherent language? Why give it a syntax that, although incomprehensible, shows repetitive structures suggesting conjugations, nouns, adjectives? Why illustrate it with such a level of detail, with a style that remains uniform on all its pages, as if everything had been created by a single hand, with one sole purpose in mind? One of the most baffling aspects of the manuscript is that we do not even know who wrote it. Although carbon analysis of the parchment dates its creation between the years 1404 and 1438, the identity of the author, or authors, remains a complete mystery. There is no signature, no dedication, no cross-reference in other contemporary texts. The ink used matches the time, reinforcing the document's authenticity as a medieval object, but that does not clarify its content. For a time, it was believed that it might have been the work of the doctor and alchemist Edward Kelly, or even the astronomer John Dee, figures linked to occultism and the Hermetic knowledge of the Renaissance. But there is no conclusive evidence either. What remains is a void filled with hypotheses, each more fascinating and more uncertain than the last. Some have proposed that the Voynich Manuscript is an encoded work to protect forbidden knowledge, perhaps related to alchemy, magical herbalism, or secret medical practices that could not be disclosed in its time. Others believe it to be a treatise of extraterrestrial origin, either channeled by a human mind in trance or copied directly from an object fallen into unknown hands. Still others, more radical, suggest that it is an attempt to reproduce a language older than time itself, a lost legacy from a civilization that preceded ours, erased by some cataclysm, of which the manuscript would be one of the few remaining witnesses. And there are those who, without falling into mysticism, interpret it as the diary of an extraordinary mind, perhaps affected by a cognitive condition that allowed it to create its own linguistic universe, alien to ordinary human communication. But even if it were all of that, an artistic invention, a centuries-old joke, a brilliant delusion, or a ciphered message for no one, the Voynich Manuscript would still be an unrepeatable phenomenon. Because with each page turned, that sensation is reaffirmed, that there is something we are not meant to understand yet. As if the text had not been written for its time, nor for ours, but for a future mind not yet born, an intelligence that might indeed be able to see the pattern behind the characters, the map behind the diagrams. And in the meantime, we can only look, we can only imagine, we can only suspect. Today, the manuscript is preserved in the Beinecke Library of Rare Books and Manuscripts at Yale University, protected behind secure glass, digitized in high resolution, and available for anyone in the world to view, to analyze, to attempt. And yet, the paradox is absolute. It has never been more accessible, and it has never been more closed. No technological advancement has achieved what perhaps only a revelation can. Because there are mysteries that are not broken through mathematical formulas, but that open like doors, suddenly, when the right mind finds the correct key. The Voynich Manuscript remains just that. A locked door. A crack in reality through which something slips that we do not understand, but that is there, written in ink and in symbols, waiting. We do not know if we will ever understand what it says, or if its message is meant to remain sealed for all eternity. But in the meantime, each page is a challenge to the intellect, a provocation to the imagination, and proof that the past, no matter how ancient, can still speak to us, even if we do not know how to answer. The Pollock Case. The girls who came back. There are stories that do not quite fit within the world as we know it. Tales that slip through the folds of logic with such disturbing naturalness that they end up settling deep within our memory. Not because they have a convincing explanation, but precisely because they do not. The case of the Pollock sisters is one of those enigmas that unsettle not because of the supernatural, but because of the deeply personal. Because it deals with the most unbearable pain a family can endure, the loss of a child, and something even more disconcerting, the possibility that those children returned, defying everything we believe we know about death, identity, and consciousness. It was the year 1957 in Hexham, a small town in northeastern England, when tragedy struck the Pollock family. John and Florence, a devout Catholic couple, lost their two eldest daughters, Joanna, 11, and Jacqueline, 6, in a car accident. The girls were walking with a friend on their way to church when they were hit by an out-of-control driver, a woman who, as later discovered, was under the influence of medication and going through an emotional breakdown. The impact was brutal. The girls died almost instantly. There was no room for comfort, no chance for goodbyes. Only the void remained, that inexplicable hole that opens up when something irreplaceable disappears without warning. John, deeply affected, sought refuge in his spiritual beliefs. He was convinced that death was not a definitive end and began nurturing the idea that his daughters would return in some way. Florence, on the other hand, resisted that thought, seeking solace in the painful acceptance of grief. Their disagreements intensified. She remained pragmatic, unwilling to entertain any idea that bordered on the fantastical. He clung tightly to the hope that their daughters were not gone forever. For months, the pain kept the family teetering on the edge of emotional collapse, and it was only with time that a new phase began to take shape. A year after the accident, Florence became pregnant again. Although early tests suggested a single heartbeat, on October 4, 1958, she gave birth to identical twin girls, Jillian and Jennifer. They were identical in appearance, but with physical signs that did not go unnoticed by their parents. Jennifer, the younger one, had a mark on her forehead, precisely in the same spot where Jacqueline, her deceased sister, had had a visible scar. She also had a birthmark on her waist that matched a distinct mole Jacqueline had in that area. These physical details were already unsettling, but it was the girls' behavior that pushed the case beyond the bounds of rationality. From a very young age, Jillian and Jennifer began to show interests, preferences, and memories that did not belong to them. They recognized places they had never visited. They referred to household objects as if they had always belonged to them, with a familiarity that only Joanna and Jacqueline could have possessed. On one occasion, they found a box of old toys in a closet, which their parents had kept in memory of the deceased sisters. The twins not only identified the toys, but argued over which belonged to whom. And the division matched exactly the possessions of Joanna and Jacqueline in life. As the girls grew, the episodes multiplied. While walking through Hexham, the twins pointed to a school they had never attended, claiming it had been their former school. They also correctly identified the park where their sisters used to play, and displayed detailed knowledge of the daily routines from the previous neighborhood where the deceased girls had lived. Their parents, terrified but fascinated, began carefully documenting each one of these behaviors. John was convinced they were witnessing undeniable proof of reincarnation. Florence, though more skeptical at first, eventually admitted that she could not explain what was happening through any conventional means of reason. But perhaps the most chilling moment came when the twins were about 4 years old. They were playing in the backyard when Florence watched them through the window. Jennifer was lying on the ground, her head resting on her sister's lap, and Jillian was staring at her with a serious expression. Then, in a firm voice, Jennifer said, "The blood is coming out of my eyes. That is how I died." The mother, frozen in horror by that sentence, ran outside to interrupt the game. That scene matched almost word for word the description in Jacqueline's autopsy report. She had suffered massive cranial trauma in the accident. The case soon began circulating in academic circles, especially after Dr. Ian Stevenson, a psychiatrist and pioneer in the scientific study of reincarnation, decided to formally investigate it. Stevenson, who had documented over 2,000 cases of children with possible memories of past lives around the world, found in the Pollock twins one of the most compelling examples he had ever encountered. He interviewed the parents, gathered photographs, studied the birthmarks, and established detailed parallels between the lives of the deceased girls and the twins. His conclusions, published years later, did not declare reincarnation as a certainty, but stated clearly that the case defied all conventional explanations in child psychology. Over time, as they entered adolescence, the memories began to fade. The twins stopped speaking of their previous life, as if a veil of forgetting had slowly fallen over those experiences. They grew into normal young women, distanced themselves from public attention, and tried to live as ordinary a life as possible. But for those who had once known the details of the case, that forgetting did not erase the wonder. Because regardless of what the girls later remembered, the physical marks, the phrases, the spontaneous reactions remained part of a documented story, with witnesses, dates, and records that refused to be forgotten. Today, the case of the Pollock sisters is still cited in serious studies on consciousness, memory, and unexplained phenomena. It is one of those episodes that force us to question where identity ends and where the soul begins, if such a thing exists. For some, it is proof that reincarnation is real and measurable. For others, it is a yet unknown psychic phenomenon, where the human mind connects to layers of reality that elude the present. And for many, it is a story that lingers like an echo in the room, like a whisper in the memory, like an unanswered question that needs no explanation to chill the blood. Because if it is true that the Pollock sisters came back, then maybe death is not as final as we believe. Perhaps there is something, a spark, a thread, a trace, that continues its path when everything else fades away. And in the silence of a birth, when a child opens their eyes for the first time, there are memories that should not be there, but are, as if the story had not ended, as if someone somewhere refused to be forgotten. The Klerksdorp Spheres. There are discoveries that should not exist, objects that emerge from the depths of the earth carrying a contradiction, being where they should not be, shaped in ways impossible for their time, without a clear reason, without a context to explain them. The Klerksdorp Spheres, found in South Africa, are one of those enigmas. Objects so simple in appearance, so small and silent, yet whose presence casts doubt on the official timelines of Earth's history. Because these small metallic spheres, found in rocks over 2,800,000,000 years old, do not appear to be the result of natural processes. And yet, there they are, perfectly sculpted, aligned, symmetrical, as if someone, long before humans existed, had designed them with a purpose we still cannot grasp. The site of the discovery, Klerksdorp, is a mining city in South Africa's northwest province, known for its deposits of pyrophyllite, a soft sedimentary rock formed deep underground and, according to geological dating, belonging to the Precambrian. This means it was formed billions of years ago, in an era when multicellular life had not yet appeared on the surface of the planet. It was within these mineral formations, as workers extracted the material for industrial use, that they began to find unexpected objects. Small metallic spheres, between 2 and 10 centimeters in diameter, with perfectly parallel grooves encircling them like rings. Some were so finely balanced that they spun on their own axis with a precision difficult to replicate even using modern tools. The initial reaction was one of bewilderment. These spheres had no place within the established geological narrative. They were found embedded within solid rock, not in cracks or recent sediments, but literally enclosed in stone layers formed more than 2 billion years ago. The miners, impressed by their shape and texture, began to keep them. Some ended up in local museums, others in private collections, and a few were sent to laboratories for analysis. That was when the mystery deepened, because metallurgical tests revealed something even more unsettling. The spheres were composed mostly of a mixture of hematite or pyrite, materials common in the Earth's subsurface, but with an unusual distribution of density and hardness. Some showed an alloy with mechanical properties difficult to reproduce without controlled smelting. In other words, they appeared to be crafted. The scientific community was divided. On one hand, orthodox geologists claimed the spheres could be explained as natural formations, resulting from a process known as concretion, in which sedimentary minerals accumulate around a core under very specific conditions. According to this view, the grooves might have formed due to environmental pressure, slow crystallization, or tectonic movements that compressed the minerals into spherical shapes. However, even among supporters of this theory, there were those who admitted that the precision of some spheres was too great for a purely random formation. Not all of them had the same perfection, but several displayed three-dimensional symmetry with margins of error reminiscent of work done on a modern lathe. Supporters of an alternative interpretation quickly voiced their views. For many independent researchers and occult theorists, the Klerksdorp Spheres represent evidence of lost technologies, perhaps belonging to an antediluvian civilization, one that existed before even the oldest known records of humanity. According to this hypothesis, the planet may have hosted advanced forms of intelligence in the deep past, destroyed by cataclysms or natural causes, whose traces now lie buried under geological layers that can only be reached through deep mining. The spheres would be artifacts from that lost civilization, capsules of information, navigation devices, remnants of unknown machinery, or even forms of energy storage. Some went even further. It was suggested that the spheres might not be of terrestrial origin. Their shape, their distribution in geological layers, and the impossibility of dating them directly, since carbon-14 cannot be applied to inorganic metal objects without organic remains, opened the door to contact theories. What if these spheres were deposited by non-human entities at a time in Earth's history when intelligent life did not yet exist? What if they were part of a monitoring network, a kind of observation system installed eons ago and forgotten over time? Those questions, though difficult to prove, have not stopped the case from gaining notoriety in wider circles. Scientific journals have published articles analyzing the available data. Mystery documentaries have featured them as one of the few physical pieces of evidence for historical anomalies that cannot be dismissed as simple mistakes or hoaxes. And while most academic researchers insist they are merely mineral concretions, details continue to emerge that challenge that explanation. Like the fact that some spheres spin spontaneously inside sealed display cases, or that others have withstood mechanical pressures that should have easily shattered them, given their size and apparent composition. The Klerksdorp Museum houses several of these spheres, protected behind thick glass, as if they were prehistoric jewels or sacred artifacts. Visitors observe them with a mix of skepticism and fascination. There is no sign declaring their artificial origin, but neither is there one that definitively denies it. And that is what keeps the mystery alive. The fact that there is no definitive explanation. The objects exist. They are real. They are there, waiting for a theory that fits them into the world's story. But for now, they have none. As is often the case with discoveries that seem to defy official timelines, the greatest enigma lies not only in the material, but in the context. Because if we accept that these spheres were shaped by intelligent hands, we are forced to rewrite a fundamental part of our history. We would have to consider the possibility that the rise of intelligence was not a phenomenon exclusive to the human lineage, or that our evolutionary path was not the first to reach a technological stage on this planet. And if, on the other hand, we accept the natural explanation, we must then acknowledge that nature is capable of producing geometrically precise structures with an elegance that mimics the hand of man, which is, in its own way, also unsettling. Today, each time a new sphere is extracted from the South African subsoil, the debate reemerges. Analyses are repeated, arguments are revisited, the shapes, grooves, and materials are examined again. And there is always a strange sensation, as if we were looking at something that belongs to an order different from the one we know. Something that cannot be explained without pushing the limits of our understanding. Perhaps the Klerksdorp Spheres are nothing more than the whim of the earth, small sculptures formed by chance over the course of eons. Or perhaps they are scattered remnants of a past we have yet to uncover, fragments of a history not found in books, temples, or fossils, but that watches us from within the silent rock. Because sometimes, the greatest secrets are not shouted. They are whispered from the depths, and a small sphere is enough to make everything we think we know begin to tremble. The echoes of the future, chronovisors and anachronisms. There are stories that seem to float in a kind of temporal limbo, tales that do not fully belong to the past, yet do not quite fit in the present either, as if the timeline, that one we believe we know so well, with its causes and effects, its orderly chronologies and chained events, could bend at certain points and let fragments from other eras escape. Throughout history, there are moments that feel like cracks, interruptions in the logical flow of events, small fissures that allow us to glimpse, even if only for an instant, something that should not be there. An object that does not match the technology of its time, a painting that depicts modern tools in an ancient scene, a text that describes inventions not yet developed. This phenomenon, disturbing in its nature, is known as anachronism. And if one observes it closely enough, it becomes a fundamental question. Is it possible that time, under certain circumstances, leaks and mixes with itself? One of the most discussed cases in this field, which has fueled countless theories, is that of the supposed chronovisor, a legendary machine whose name has been linked for decades to the Vatican and to the most jealously guarded secrets of the Church. According to testimonies gathered by researchers such as François Brunet, the chronovisor was said to be a kind of window to the past, a device developed by a group of scientists and theologians during the 1950s. Among them Father Pellegrino Ernetti, a Benedictine monk trained in quantum physics and ancient music. The idea was as radical as it was fascinating, an instrument capable of capturing the residual waves of historical events, a sort of temporal television that allowed scenes from the past to be observed as if they were still taking place. Ernetti claimed to have witnessed, thanks to the chronovisor, events as monumental as the crucifixion of Christ, theatrical performances from classical Rome, and even sessions of the Roman Senate in its most glorious moments. He described in detail the garments, the sounds, the language used, as if he had been there. However, he never showed the machine. He alleged that it had been dismantled out of fear of the ethical and political consequences of its use, a decision supposedly made by the Vatican itself upon realizing the potential such a device would have to manipulate truth, alter history, or exploit faith. The few images that emerged, such as the famous and widely questioned photograph of a dying Christ, were the subject of accusations of forgery, artistic plagiarism, and disinformation. But beyond Ernetti's credibility, the idea of the chronovisor captured the imagination of millions. It was not merely a science fiction device, but an allegory about control over time. If it were possible to observe the past with complete fidelity, without mediation, without interpretation, without manipulable records, then all human history would become transparent, and with it, truth in its purest and most dangerous form. Who would possess such power? Who would decide what to view and what to conceal? However, the echoes of time do not end with Vatican theories. Across the planet, there are findings that seem to whisper that something in our linear understanding of time is not entirely well-founded. Physical anachronisms, for example, are a constant source of bewilderment. Technological artifacts found in geological layers where they should not exist. Metal tools trapped in rocks millions of years old. Figurines holding objects resembling spacesuits. Depictions of helicopters in Egyptian temples, carved long before the propeller was even conceived. Each of these elements is, of course, challenged by conventional archaeologists who speak of erosion, misinterpretation, or even deliberate hoaxes. But even if most of these examples can be explained through rational means, there always remains a fraction that does not dissolve so easily. And that fraction, small but persistent, is what keeps the mystery alive. There are also accounts that seem pulled from a novel, yet have been documented with a level of detail that is unsettling. People who claim to have had visions of future events with chilling accuracy, or to have lived episodes that repeat years later with uncanny precision. Cases such as that of writer Morgan Robertson, who in 1898 published a novel titled Futility, in which a giant transatlantic liner called the Titan, considered unsinkable, crashes into an iceberg in the North Atlantic and sinks with nearly all its passengers. 14 years later, the Titanic would meet that very same fate in a real-life event eerily similar to the fictional tale. Or the case of Argentine cartoonist Horacio Vilches, who in 1979 published a comic titled El Eternauta II, in which Buenos Aires is devastated by an attack on a civic center, with a description of the aerial strike and its consequences that, decades later, many consider a foreshadowing of the AMIA bombing. Coincidence? Synchronicity? Or fragments of time leaking through, as if the future left traces in the present? These ideas have been explored by various schools of thought, from quantum physics, which suggests that time may not be a line but a web of possibilities, to Hermetic philosophy, which sees time as a cyclical mirror where everything that was will be, and everything that will be already was. Even certain modern physics experiments, such as those related to entangled particles or retrocausality, are beginning to touch on the idea that an effect can precede its cause, and that the universe, on a microscopic level, may not obey the laws we take for granted at human scale. In this context, time becomes something malleable, unpredictable, even conscious. And if that is the case, then anachronisms cease to be errors and become messages. Perhaps the chronovisor, if it ever existed, was not a machine to look backward, but a tool to reveal what has always been there, just beyond the reach of our senses. The continuum where past, present, and future are intertwined like overlapping layers, and where certain places, certain people, or certain moments have the ability to resonate with different times. Sometimes these resonances manifest as intuitions, other times as images, still others as objects that do not belong where they are found. Each of these signs is like a crack in the wall of time, and behind each crack, there is a universe trying to peer through. And perhaps the most disturbing thing of all is the suspicion that these leaks are not mistakes, nor isolated phenomena, that they are part of a pattern. That time, in its deepest nature, is less linear than we believe, and more like an ocean where currents intersect, echoes resound, and the present is just one shore among many. Anachronisms and echoes of the future are not waiting for a definitive explanation. They are there to remind us that time, that dimension we think we understand, still holds secrets that slip between the seconds, like shadows that arrive before their moment. And that perhaps the future already happened, or is happening now, in another corner of time that we do not yet know how to see. The Philadelphia Experiment. During the dark years of World War II, while the world wavered between despair and reconstruction, rumors began to circulate on the fringes of the documented world about an experiment that, if confirmed, would completely change our understanding of physics, space, and time. A test carried out by the United States Navy in the port of Philadelphia, where it was not merely a matter of military camouflage or optical invisibility, but of the supposed total dematerialization of a warship and its instant teleportation to another city, with consequences bordering on the incomprehensible. They called it the Philadelphia Experiment, and over the years it became one of the most disturbing and persistent legends in modern history, because it is not only about secret technology or cutting-edge science, but something far more unsettling: the collateral effects of manipulating the fundamental laws of the universe without fully understanding what is being touched. The central account revolves around the USS Eldridge, an escort destroyer that was allegedly subjected, in 1943, to an ultra-secret experiment driven by the desperate desire to find a decisive advantage against German submarines. The idea, according to the most well-known versions, was simple in its ambition and complex in its execution: to make a ship invisible to radar and possibly to the naked eye. To achieve this, scientists supposedly linked to the project, including, according to some testimonies, Albert Einstein himself through his unified field theory, would have developed a system of extremely intense electromagnetic fields that, when applied around the hull of the Eldridge, could bend light and radio waves, thus camouflaging the ship. Up to that point, it might have seemed like a development within the scope of military science. However, according to various testimonies that emerged after the war, what happened during the experiment was not invisibility. It was something else. On October 28, 1943, according to these reports, the generators on board the USS Eldridge were activated. A greenish mist began to envelop the ship. Witnesses in the port allegedly saw the vessel blur before their eyes, as if it were being absorbed by the surroundings. Then, it disappeared completely. For several minutes, there was no trace of the ship on the surface of the water. When it finally reappeared, part of the crew showed signs of severe trauma. Some were disoriented, others completely in shock. But the most terrifying part came afterward. According to the accounts, several sailors were found fused with the metallic structures of the ship, as if their bodies had been partially absorbed by the solid matter during the dematerialization. Some were embedded in the hull walls, others in the steel floors, alive but trapped, with their faces frozen in expressions of indescribable pain. Others simply vanished and were never found. The few who retained their sanity spoke of having been transported, though they did not know how to explain it. Some claimed to have been in Norfolk, Virginia, hundreds of kilometers away, while others spoke of having experienced an absolute void, a non-place outside of time. There were even those who claimed to have seen fragments of what did not seem to belong to this world. Over the years, the story grew, fueled by declarations such as that of Carlos Allende, also known as Carl Allen, a man who claimed to have witnessed the experiment from a nearby ship. In letters addressed to researcher Morris Jessup, Allende detailed what happened, including the mental and physical effects suffered by the sailors, the technological failures, and even speculations about quantum teleportation and time travel. Jessup, an astronomer and writer, took the case seriously, intrigued by the internal consistency of the letters and their technical level, although he also began to notice certain inconsistencies. The case deeply affected his personal and professional life, and his death under unclear circumstances in 1959, officially a suicide, has been interpreted by some as another piece of the puzzle. The United States Navy has always denied that anything like the Philadelphia experiment ever took place. In fact, records of the USS Eldridge indicate that on the specified dates it was located elsewhere, although some have argued that those documents could have been altered. The fact that several government reports related to experimental technology research were classified for decades has not helped calm suspicions either. Every time the story is discredited, new details emerge, many hard to verify, but also difficult to completely refute. One of the most fascinating theories is the one suggesting that the experiment did not only cause invisibility or teleportation, but created a temporal fracture. According to this version, the affected sailors did not experience a simple spatial jump, but a kind of incomplete journey through time, which would explain their states of confusion, memory gaps, and accounts of experiences they could not place in any real framework. This opens the door to speculation about the side effects of manipulating electromagnetic fields at extreme scales, especially considering that many concepts in quantum physics, such as superposition or entanglement, still escape full understanding even by the brightest experts. Parallels have also emerged with the so-called Montauk Project, an alleged military program developed in Long Island decades after the Philadelphia experiment, which supposedly attempted to apply the initial discoveries to experiments on mind control, dimensional portals, and time travel. Some witnesses claim that both projects were connected, and that the mistakes made with the Eldridge served as the foundation for the more ambitious experiments of Montauk, where the goal was no longer to make a ship disappear, but to directly manipulate the fabric of reality. At the heart of this mystery beats a truth that is hard to ignore. Our understanding of space and time is still partial. We know how to measure them, how to model them, even how to predict their behavior under normal conditions. But on the fringes of physics, where theories verge on the metaphysical, disturbing possibilities begin to open up. Possibilities that could allow matter to be in two places at once, or a living person to disappear from their own present without a trace. And if those experiments truly took place, if the technology to bend reality was ever created or even tested, then the side effects could still be resonating today. Invisible, silent, like persistent ripples on a pond we believe to be still. Perhaps that is why the Philadelphia experiment continues to spark so much interest. Not because we have conclusive proof, but because deep down, it represents a warning. A story in which human beings, in their eagerness to dominate the laws of nature, open a door they are not ready to face. And by doing so, they unleash consequences that no one can control. Because perhaps invisibility is not the most terrifying thing one can achieve, but what is seen on the other side, when the world, for a moment, stops behaving the way we know it. Thus, among hidden reports, vanished photographs, fragmented memories, and increasingly elaborate theories, the Philadelphia experiment continues to float in an uncertain place, like the USS Eldridge on that October day, halfway between the real and the impossible. And perhaps, as some versions claim, it is still happening. In some fold of time, we are unknowingly dangerously close to glimpsing once again. The inhabitants of the inner earth. There are myths that traverse cultures without the need for contact between them. Stories that arise in opposite corners of the planet and yet share the same thematic core, as if they respond to a truth too ancient to have been completely forgotten. One of the most persistent tales, both in oral traditions and esoteric literature, is that of a hidden world beneath our feet. A vast, deep place, illuminated by unknown sources, inhabited by civilizations that have remained concealed for millennia. For some, it is merely a metaphor for the collective unconscious, for the fears and desires buried in our psyche. But for others, it is a very concrete, though uncomfortable possibility that the Earth is not as solid or uninhabited as we believe. The hollow Earth theory has been explored for centuries, and although it has been dismissed by conventional science in its most literal forms, the truth is that geology has not been able to drill through even a significant fraction of the planet. The Earth's crust, in relation to the planet's diameter, is thinner than the skin of an apple. The deepest exploration ever carried out by humankind, the Kola super-deep borehole in Russia, reached barely 12 kilometers in depth, a laughable figure compared to the 6,300 kilometers that separate us from the Earth's core. Everything that is said about the planet's inner layers is based on seismic inferences, mathematical models, and simulations. There is no direct observation, and where evidence is lacking, mysteries are born. Since ancient times, old peoples have spoken of underground worlds. In Greek mythology, Hades was not simply a moral hell, but a concrete region beneath the surface, with rivers, guardians, and cities. In Hinduism, the Patala are described, subterranean realms of great beauty, illuminated by glowing stones, inhabited by Nagas, beings that are half human and half serpent. Mesoamerican traditions spoke of an underworld called Xibalba, with structures as complex as any metropolis on the surface. Nordic peoples believed in Svartalfaheim, the underground realm of the Dark Elves. In all of these accounts, a disturbing pattern emerges. The world beneath the earth is not a mere void, but a structured domain, inhabited with its own rules. In the early 20th century, several writers and explorers began collecting more contemporary testimonies about the existence of these inner worlds. One of the most frequently mentioned cases is that of Admiral Richard E. Byrd, an officer of the United States Navy who conducted expeditions to the poles. According to some unofficial versions of his diaries, whose authenticity has been debated, Byrd allegedly witnessed during his flight over the Arctic in 1947 an entrance to an unknown land beyond the North Pole. He described green mountains, rivers, prehistoric animals, and advanced technology in the hands of beings who received him courteously, warning him about the dangers of nuclear weapons. This story was discredited by military circles, but the myth persisted, amplified by theories that relate the poles to portals into the interior of the planet. Another central figure is the writer and occultist Raymond Bernard, who in the 1960s popularized a refined version of the theory. The Earth would be hollow, with openings at the poles, and inside it there would be a central sun that provides heat and light to subterranean continents. There, descendants of ancient civilizations such as the Atlanteans, the Lemurians, or even visitors from other worlds who found refuge in the planet's depths would live. According to Bernard, these civilizations do not seek direct contact with surface humanity due to our violence, but they have intervened at key moments to preserve planetary balance. Modern defenders of these ideas point to unexplained phenomena such as the auroras borealis, which, according to the official version, are due to solar particles colliding with the magnetosphere, but which some claim could be related to energy emissions from within. They also mention certain thermal anomalies at the poles, ancient maps showing non-existent regions, and testimonies from northern tribes who speak of people from the depths or warm lands beyond the ice. The most provocative accounts come from independent explorers and seekers, many of whom claim to have found secret entrances to deep caves that branch out beyond any known map. There is talk of underground systems that span entire continents, tunnels connecting ancient temples with remote mountains, and echoes that seem to come from endless depths. Some claim to have felt presences, heard voices, or even had brief encounters with beings that did not seem human but conveyed knowledge through intuitions or mental symbols. These testimonies, although impossible to verify scientifically, are repeated with similar nuances in different parts of the world, which makes, at least narratively, a shared underground geography emerge. Even within contemporary esotericism, there are those who believe that the interior of the Earth houses civilizations more advanced than ours, both technologically and spiritually. They are attributed with abilities such as energy manipulation, interdimensional travel, and even a role as planetary guardians. In these versions, the surface is just an outer, noisy, and chaotic layer, while true knowledge and evolution have been preserved in the silence of the underground. Some names have been assigned to these hypothetical civilizations: Shambhala, Agartha, Telos. These cities are said to function in harmony with natural laws and are protected by systems that prevent their direct detection, unless one has been invited. Official science remains firm in its position. The Earth, although made up of different layers, crust, mantle, outer and inner core, is a solid body, without large-scale cavities that could house structures or civilizations. Seismographs, seismic wave measurements, the planet's density, all point to a configuration consistent with known physics. However, there is one aspect that is never discussed in depth: how little we truly know about what lies beyond a few kilometers down. Everything else is technical speculation, no matter how precise it may seem. And that, for the curious, for those who do not accept the established narrative, represents fertile ground for imagination or revelation. Perhaps it is not about imagining that Earth is a hollow shell floating in space, but about thinking of it as a complex organism full of chambers, communicating vessels, and unknown spaces that have existed since before humans built their first city. Places where time flows differently, where evolution followed parallel paths, where the secrets of a carefully silenced history are still kept. The inhabitants of the inner Earth, whether real or symbolic, function as a dark mirror. They represent what we do not want to see, what is buried, what has been hidden for generations. And as long as we continue walking on this surface believing that we know everything, that invisible world beneath our feet will continue to exist. In the tales of ancient sages, in the visions of mystics, and perhaps, for a few, in the direct experience of having crossed that boundary and discovered that the center of the earth is not fire or molten rock, but a living mystery. The rains that should never happen. Sometimes the extraordinary falls from the sky without warning, without clear explanation, without any possible logic. It does not come accompanied by lightning or epic storms. Sometimes it happens in broad daylight, under a calm sky that anticipates nothing out of the ordinary. And yet, the impossible occurs. Objects, substances, or creatures that should not belong to any known weather system begin to descend from the air. Instead of water, fish, frogs, blood, flesh, amorphous gels, or even hot stones fall. These anomalous rains, recorded for centuries in various parts of the world, constitute one of the most baffling categories of atmospheric phenomena. They do not respond to usual meteorological patterns, nor to causes easily reproducible in laboratories. And although some have been documented with a certain scientific rigor, others completely escape the realm of explanation. They are events that seem taken from folklore, but have been observed, recorded, and sometimes feared with good reason. One of the best known and strangely frequent cases is that of animal rains. Over the years, hundreds of towns have reported that, without any prior warning, the sky began to drop living creatures. Fish, frogs, crabs, salamanders, and even small reptiles have been found on roads, roofs, and farmland, often in communities far from the sea or any significant water source. One of the most famous cases occurred in 1873 in Kansas, United States, when a frog rain surprised the inhabitants of a small rural community. The amphibians appeared in large numbers, covering streets, roofs, and fields with a living, slippery carpet that left everyone present bewildered. The most puzzling fact was that the frogs were not injured. Some even seemed to be in perfect condition, as if they had been carefully placed there. Decades later, in 1947, a fish rain was reported in Marksville, Louisiana. The event was witnessed by numerous people and confirmed by local authorities. The fish, small and freshwater species, fell as if thrown from a great height, but showed no signs of severe damage. Scientists who investigated the phenomenon proposed the theory that a tornado or waterspout could have sucked them from a nearby body of water, transporting them for kilometers before releasing them on dry land. This explanation, while plausible for some events, does not fully fit all cases, especially those in which the animals found do not correspond to any species present in the region, or when no extreme atmospheric conditions are detected in the hours before. Even more disturbing is the recurrence of biological rains with elements that do not fit any recognized form of life. One of the most mysterious cases is the so-called gelatinous rain that occurred in Oakville, Washington, in August 1994. For 3 consecutive days, a semi-transparent substance fell from the sky, covering roofs, vehicles, and yards. Those who came into contact with the substance began to show strange symptoms: respiratory difficulty, fatigue, nausea, and disorientation. Initial analyses revealed that the material contained human white cells, but without nuclei, which prevented it from being classified as active life. Samples were sent to various laboratories, including the Washington State Department of Health, but no one could determine with certainty what that substance was, where it came from, or why it had affected the residents' health. These types of incidents force us to reconsider the fragility of our explanations. Because although meteorological science has advanced enormously in understanding the processes that determine climate, there are still phenomena that lie outside that framework, as if they respond to other variables, to other dimensions of reality that we are not equipped to fully understand. In previous centuries, these rains were interpreted as divine punishments or supernatural signs. Medieval chronicles describe rains of blood that caused panic and massive penance among peasants. In 2001, in Kerala, India, a red rain stained the ground for several days. Although the scientific explanation pointed to microscopic algae spores present in the atmosphere, some later analyses suggested the presence of unknown cells with physical characteristics incompatible with earthly biology. In 2004, in Serbia, a rain of frogs was documented falling without any visible storm, in a completely clear area. And in 2015, in Ethiopia, witnesses reported the fall of stones of considerable size in a scattered but clearly directed pattern. It was not a common hailstorm. The stones were not made of ice but solid rock, as if they had been thrown by an invisible hand. These types of phenomena are not limited to one continent, culture, or era. They appear in chronicles of antiquity, in 19th century scientific records, in contemporary media, and in amateur investigations that treat the topic with the seriousness of a 19th century naturalist. What is particularly fascinating is that these impossible rains do not follow a climatic pattern, but a symbolic one. They fall in moments of social tension, in times of transition, in regions marked by a particular type of uncertainty. It is as if the anomalous manifests when the world is least prepared to understand it. As if the sky itself has a way of reminding those who look up that there are more things among the clouds than we can control. Some alternative researchers have proposed that these phenomena could be residues from other dimensions, fragments of parallel realities that, due to a temporal or energetic fault, slip into ours. Others suggest human manipulations, secret experiments with electromagnetic fields, tests of weather weapons that escape public view but not their effects. There are also accounts from travelers and nomads who claim to have seen metallic fragments fall, tiny structures that look like machine parts, as if something had exploded in another plane of existence and its pieces had crossed the veil between worlds. Although many of these stories lack physical proof, they have notable narrative value. They describe with detail, coherence, and consistency events that cannot be explained by classical meteorology nor by everyday logic. The rains that should never happen are more than simple oddities. They are reminders that we live under a sky full of mysteries. And despite radar, satellites, and predictive models, there are still things that fall without reason, without apparent cause, without warning. And every time an animal, a substance, or an impossible object touches the ground after descending from above, the question arises again, not as a literary device, but as a human necessity. Who controls what falls from the sky when the sky decides to ignore our rules? Perhaps we will never know where these rains come from. Maybe we will never predict when they will return. But as long as they keep falling, even in remote, silent places far from media noise, They will continue reminding us that the Earth is not a closed system, that the sky is not a sealed roof, and that sometimes the impossible seeps through. Not from the unknown as a metaphor, but from the unknown as tangible, wet, living, strange reality, falling drop by drop on the world we believe we understand. The Oslo Watcher. There are presences that do not need to make noise to leave a mark. They do not break doors or throw objects. They do not emit screams from the darkness, nor manifest spectacularly, as happens in classic ghost stories or paranormal encounters. There are others that are quieter, more subtle, and precisely because of that, infinitely more unsettling. Apparitions that cannot be explained, that repeat with an inexplicable consistency, that do not interact, that simply stand there at a distance, as if they were part of a scene we do not understand. The case known as the Oslo Watcher falls into that category of disturbing phenomena by accumulation. A figure that does not act, does not attack, does not even move, but whose mere existence seems to alter reality around it. The first reports date back to the late 1990s in a residential neighborhood west of Oslo, Norway. It was not a single or sudden event, but rather a collection of testimonies that slowly began to build, like a narrative that no one quite knew how to articulate, but that everyone who experienced it remembered clearly. Different people, at different times, described seeing through their windows or from the street a motionless figure, dressed in an indefinite way. Some said with a long coat, others talked about a dark suit without visible details, always located in little trafficked places, the corner of a dead-end street, the edge of an empty park at dusk, the sidewalk in front of an abandoned building. It never approached, never said anything. It was just there, looking toward a particular window, always the same one. At first, no one wanted to talk about it. Oslo is a city with a deeply reserved culture, where private life is respected to the extreme and where, as a general rule, people do not easily share their concerns. But little by little, some neighbors began to wonder if they were the only ones who had seen that stranger. And when they started to exchange experiences, the confusion was total. The descriptions matched with a precision that ruled out coincidence. The figure always appeared at sunset, always alone, and disappeared when someone tried to approach. Some tried to photograph it, but the images were blurry, failed to develop, or simply came out blank. Others, more determined, went down to the street, ran to where they had seen it. And when they arrived at the exact spot, there was no one, as if time itself had folded to protect the mystery. One of the most baffling elements of the case was the apparent selectivity of the Watcher. Not everyone could see it. Some people living in the same building or even in the same apartment as the original witnesses claimed to have noticed nothing unusual. They did not see anyone outside, did not feel anything strange. Instead, those who did see it spoke of an almost physical sensation. A tension in the chest, a chill starting at the nape and spreading down the back, an instinctive certainty of being watched with an intensity that no security camera could replicate. That invisible but real gaze generated states of anxiety, insomnia, and even panic attacks in some cases. And despite everything, there was never a concrete act of aggression. The only thing that figure did was watch. The testimonies began to increase in number and detail. A teenager living alone in a third-floor apartment said that for weeks he felt the presence every night. He looked out the window, saw it standing there, always at the same exact meter on the sidewalk, always looking toward his window. He tried to keep the curtains closed, but he felt it was there anyway. Another neighbor, an elderly man living on the ground floor, stated that he saw it occasionally in the early mornings, just as the fog began to dissipate, and that during those moments he perceived a strange distortion in sounds. The birds went silent. Traffic seemed to slow down, as if the entire city suspended itself during the apparition. The figure of the Watcher began to generate speculation. not only among neighbors but in online forums, blogs dedicated to the paranormal, and mystery communities that began collecting the cases. Some pointed out parallels with the man-in-the-hat phenomenon, a recurring presence in dreams and nightmares of thousands around the world, characterized by its passive posture and its ability to generate terror without moving. Others tried to frame it in more structured theories: interdimensional visitors, mind control experiments, projections of foreign consciousnesses that can only be seen by certain people in extreme emotional states. One of the most persistent theories was that the Watcher was not a being itself, but a kind of reflection or echo of some future event that has not yet occurred. As if its presence were a crack in time, an early appearance of something still on its way. This hypothesis arose after several witnesses began reporting similar dreams. In them, the figure looked at them from a short distance, but did not speak. Instead, it showed them scenes of destruction, chaos, or absolute loneliness. Some woke up crying, others with the sensation of having lived years in a second. Those dreams, despite being described by people who did not know each other, contained disturbing common elements: broken clocks, buildings collapsing in slow motion, and a low sound, almost like a frequency that could only be felt, not heard. In the winter of 2007, the phenomenon seemed to intensify. More than 10 people within the same urban radius claimed to have seen the Watcher during consecutive nights. The figure was even sighted on rooftops, places that could not be accessed without keys or climbing several meters. The police received alert calls but never found anyone. Finally, a local journalist published an article in an alternative Oslo newspaper, giving visibility to the case with a chilling headline: "The One Who Watches from Outside." From that moment on, the Watcher disappeared completely. It was never reported again in that area of the city. Some said it left because too many people had seen it. Others believed that exposure broke some kind of unspoken rule. But for those who saw it, the experience did not end there. Years later, several of the original witnesses claimed to have felt its presence in other places, even after moving away from Oslo. They did not see it, but they felt it. And more than one said they had brief, fleeting encounters in different cities, in different contexts, as if that figure was not tied to a geographic point, but to the people themselves. As if its interest was not the space, but consciousness. The case of the Oslo Watcher, without blood or screams, without physical traces or missing bodies, remains one of the most chilling mysteries precisely because of its subtlety. It leaves no records that can be archived, but deep emotional scars. It does not manifest to convince skeptics, but it persists in the minds of those who have witnessed it. And perhaps, the most disturbing thing of all is that it does not seek to be understood, just to be, just to watch, as if its very existence were a wordless message, a living question that watches us from the other side of the visible, waiting. The mystery of the Black Knight satellite. High above the sky, beyond the layers of atmosphere that surround the planet, in that seemingly empty space that appears to belong solely to science and engineers, there is something that does not fit. A persistent shadow that has been photographed, tracked, and even documented in certain official records. Yet no one has been able to identify it precisely. It is called the Black Knight satellite. The Black Knight. And it is possibly one of the most enigmatic objects to have orbited the Earth. Its mystery does not stem only from its shape or uncertain origin, but from the way its presence has been hinted at over time through scattered reports, unexplained radio signals, and images that seem to come from a narrative space never planned to have. The first element fueling the Black Knight myth is not visual, but auditory. In the late 1890s, the scientist and inventor Nikola Tesla declared that he had picked up radio signals which, according to him, could not have a terrestrial origin. He claimed these were repetitive, organized patterns, unlike any natural interference or background noise. At that time, transmission technology was so primitive that such a claim found no immediate resonance. It was considered eccentric, a rambling of a mind that was constantly decades ahead of its time. But Tesla insisted. And over the years, his words began to take on a prophetic tone. In 1927, a Norwegian radio operator named Jørgen Hulse began receiving echoes of his own transmissions, but with a delay that could not be explained by normal ionospheric reflections. These were the so-called long-delayed echoes, a phenomenon still not fully understood today and linked by some to the existence of artificial objects in orbit that capture and return signals. In the 1950s, when interest in space intensified, both the United States and the Soviet Union began launching satellites for scientific and military purposes. It was in this context that an unknown object began to attract the attention of some observers. Its trajectory was anomalous. It did not follow the typical orbit of satellites launched from Earth, and it seemed to move opposite the planet's rotation, something that was technically unfeasible with the means available then. In 1960, the United States Department of Defense issued a statement acknowledging they had detected a dark object in a polar orbit, a region at that time unused by any country. There was speculation it could be a Soviet spy satellite, but Moscow denied having any device in that position. The press of the time reported the news with a mixture of alarm and curiosity, and the term "Black Night" began to circulate timidly in specialized publications. Some researchers, tracing old archives, pointed out that the earliest observations of the supposed satellite dated back as far as 1954, before there was technology to place objects in orbit. That made no sense. How could something be up there before the first Sputnik? The 1990s brought an image that became central to the mystery. During the Endeavour shuttle mission STS-88, astronauts captured a series of photographs showing a dark, irregularly shaped object floating at high altitude above the Earth. The figure is enigmatic, with angular contours, and does not resemble any recognizable piece of human technology. The images were released by NASA, and, as expected, sparked a storm of theories. The agency explained that the object was probably a thermal blanket that had come loose during one of the maneuvers, but this explanation did not convince everyone. The shape of the object, the way it seemed to hold position, the number of photos taken from different angles, all seemed to point to something more complex. The name Black Night regained strength, now accompanied by images that fueled collective imagination. Advocates of the most radical theory claim the Black Night is neither human nor recent, that it is an extraterrestrial probe placed in Earth orbit thousands, perhaps tens of thousands of years ago, with the purpose of monitoring humanity. Some even link it to lost civilizations like Atlantis or Lemuria, asserting that its presence has subtly influenced the development of our species. This idea, as fantastic as it sounds, has been considered by some researchers as an updated version of the so-called zoo hypothesis, a theory within the Fermi paradox proposing that advanced civilizations might be observing us without direct intervention, much like a scientist watching an ant colony. More moderate voices hold that the object could be a human artifact secretly launched during the Cold War, perhaps part of an unrevealed program that slipped government control. Some point to Project Corona, a classified spy satellite program operating in unusual orbits, but no known documentation links Corona to a retrograde orbit like that attributed to the Black Night. Also, the design of the supposed object, if we take the photos as a basis, does not resemble any satellite technology developed at that time. Doubts increase when combining the images, historic radio signals, and anomalous trajectories. The lack of consistent official records, the reluctance of space agencies to discuss the topic, and the silence following early reports have all contributed to fueling the idea of a cover-up. But the most puzzling thing is the persistence of the phenomenon. To this day, no definitive explanation has managed to dismantle all elements of the mystery without leaving loose ends. And that precisely is what makes the Black Night such a fascinating piece. It cannot be stated with absolute certainty, but it cannot be completely dismissed either. Some theorists suggest that the most important aspect of the Black Night is not its physical nature, but its symbolic function. It represents the boundary between what we think we know about space and what still eludes us. It reminds us that even with telescopes scanning the far reaches of the universe, we still do not understand everything happening right above our heads. That the sky, like the ocean, still holds secrets. Perhaps we will never know what the Black Knight satellite really is. It may have been from the start a series of coincidences, misinterpretations, and overlapping stories forming a modern myth. Or it could be something more. A silent intelligence, a sentinel beyond human time, orbiting quietly while decades pass, waiting, watching. And if that is the case, then perhaps the true message is not that we are being watched, but that we have already been observed long before we learned to look up. The Cave of the Taos and the Lost Archives. Deep within the Ecuadorian jungle, where the humid air intertwines with the mist and the treetops form an impenetrable natural dome, lies one of the most enigmatic places on the South American continent. It is a real cave, mapped, explored by scientific expeditions, and recognized by the archaeological community. Yet, everything surrounding its existence is wrapped in layers of mystery that no official explanation dissolves. We are talking about the Cave of the Taos, a natural formation located in the Morona Santiago province in Ecuador's Amazon region, which has been associated, for decades, with ancestral secrets, impossible manuscripts, non-human structures, and the possible existence of an underground library containing knowledge that could completely rewrite the history of humanity. The entrance to this cave is situated in the territory of the Shuar, an indigenous community that for generations has protected the place, not only out of respect for its sacred environment, but from a deep conviction that something inhabits its interior that does not belong to this world. The cave's name comes from the Taos, nocturnal birds that nest in its depths and are considered by the Shuar as messengers between worlds. For centuries, these peoples have avoided venturing beyond certain inner galleries, arguing that whoever enters without permission or with bad intentions does not return. For a long time, the Cave of the Taos was a place of merely geological and ethnographic interest. But everything changed radically in the 1970s when a name began to circulate associated with the mystery of the place. Juan Morix, a Hungarian-Argentinian researcher who claimed to have discovered the unthinkable in one of the underground chambers. According to his testimony, he had accessed, guided by the Shuar, a man-made hall within the mountain's depths, completely different from the surrounding natural cavities. There he claimed to have found what he described as a metallic library, thousands of plates engraved with an unknown language, stored as if they were books on shelves perfectly carved in stone. Alongside them, he said he saw humanoid figures, sculptures of extinct animals, maps of continents that do not exist, and mechanisms he could not understand. Morich signed a legal declaration in 1969 before a notary in Guayaquil, asserting that the discovery was real and that he was willing to reveal its exact location to the Ecuadorian government, on the condition that the investigation be managed honestly and under international supervision. The news gradually leaked, generating a wave of interest that soon reached unexpected spheres. Among the many fascinated by the story was a young Scottish man with spiritual and scientific inclinations, Erich von Däniken, the famous author of Chariots of the Gods, who, after learning of Moritz's account, included the Cave of the Taos in his narrative about ancient astronauts and advanced pre-human civilizations. For Däniken, the place was not just a cave with mysterious artifacts, but further proof that official history had deliberately ignored the true origins of human knowledge. Driven by this growing international attention, in 1976, one of the most ambitious expeditions ever undertaken on South American soil was organized. The British expedition to the Cave of the Taos, a joint venture among scientists, speleologists, military personnel, and experts from various fields, including Neil Armstrong, the first human to set foot on the moon. The fact that a figure of such caliber joined an underground exploration in the Ecuadorian jungle was interpreted by many as an unequivocal sign that there was something important behind the mystery. Although the official version of the expedition maintains that no evidence of artificial constructions or metallic plates was found, some team members have given interviews with nuances that open the door to a less categorical interpretation. There was talk of unusually symmetrical chambers, polished stone structures that did not match the local geology, areas with unusual acoustic resonance, and, above all, a constant feeling of being watched. Since then, the legend has continued to grow. Despite multiple later expeditions and the access that at certain times has been granted to independent researchers, a clear public image of the supposed metallic library has never been presented. Skeptics claim that Moritz exaggerated or even invented the discovery, though they acknowledge that he never contradicted himself and maintained his version until the end of his days. Others suggest that he might have been silenced or pressured not to reveal the exact location, and some even argue that part of the discovery was secretly extracted by foreign powers, which would explain the subsequent secrecy surrounding the case. Among the most fascinating theories is one connecting the Cave of the Taos with an underground network of tunnels spanning the entire South American continent, linking strategic points between the Amazon, the Andes mountain range, and certain pre-Columbian archaeological enclaves that seem precisely aligned. According to some researchers, this network was not built by known cultures, but by a civilization preceding the cataclysm that gave rise to the current historical configuration. The metallic library, in that sense, would not be just any archive, but a technological legacy safeguarded underground until humanity is ready to receive it. The language inscribed on the plates, which Moritz described as neither alphabetic nor hieroglyphic, but rather a coding of abstract symbols, has been linked by alternative theorists to the language of the Watchers, beings mentioned in ancient Sumerian, Babylonian, and Hebrew texts, to whom the forbidden knowledge was supposedly given to humans. In this crossroads of myth, archaeology, and spirituality, the cave becomes a powerful symbol, the womb of the earth guarding the secrets of a forgotten past, or perhaps deliberately erased. The difficulty in accessing the site, tensions with the indigenous communities protecting the place, and the institutional unwillingness to fund thorough investigations have made the mystery remain, fueled by silence and the absence of conclusive evidence. But this same lack of resolution has made the story endure over time, becoming one of the strongest narratives within alternative archaeology. Because unlike other similar myths, in this case the cave exists, it is mapped, it has been explored by real adventurers, and it continues to generate questions for which no one has a definitive answer. Perhaps the most unsettling thing of all is the feeling that the Cave of the Taos still holds something, that among its irregular passages and natural chambers there may be a door waiting to be opened. A door that does not lead only to an archaeological finding, but to a completely different vision of the place we occupy in the world. And if that knowledge is still there, buried beneath layers of silence, stone, and oblivion, it is not because it has been lost, but because we are not yet ready to understand what it contains. Maybe it is not about finding it, but about being worthy of receiving it. Meanwhile, the jungle continues to envelop the entrance, as if the earth itself knew there are secrets that should only be revealed when the time, at last, is right. The enigma of shared dreams. There is a blurred boundary that separates wakefulness from sleep, a fuzzy zone of consciousness where reality becomes malleable and the limits between the internal and the external completely fade away. Dreaming is one of the most intimate and mysterious activities of human existence, a universal phenomenon that, nevertheless, continues to elude any definitive understanding. Every night, millions of people immerse themselves in unreal scenes, inhabit worlds that are built and destroyed in seconds, talk with beings they have never seen, and experience emotions that seem more intense than those of daily life. But there are occasions, rare, almost anecdotal at first glance, when those dreams transcend individuality. When two or more people describe with astonishing similarity having dreamed exactly the same thing, the same places, the same events, the same figures. It is then when the mystery becomes tangible and a question arises as baffling as it is inevitable. Is it possible to share a dream? Although scientific records about this phenomenon are still limited, testimonies multiply, especially in the internet era, where forums, networks, and specialized communities have begun documenting this type of experience more systematically. It is not just vaguely similar coincidences, generic images like landscapes or shared emotions, but detailed narratives in which people who do not know each other describe having been in the same dream space, having interacted within the dream, and upon waking, remembering what was lived as if they had shared a real experience, but within the dimension of the dream. One of the most cited cases comes from an informal study conducted in the early 21st century, in which a community of lucid dreamers, people trained to be conscious within their own dreams, began reporting encounters with a particular figure, a thin man with a blurry face, who appeared standing next to a blue door. What was fascinating was not only that multiple participants claimed to have seen the same individual, but that all placed him in the same environment, a kind of lobby on the edge of a destroyed city, with a purple sky without sun and a feeling of electricity in the air. The accounts matched in architectural details, in the arrangement of objects, in the exact phrase the man repeated, "It is not your time." None of them had communicated with each other before the experiment, and all documented it separately. Some psychiatrists have theorized that this type of phenomenon could be due to shared archetypes, universal symbols that arise from the collective unconscious, as Carl Jung proposed. From this perspective, certain figures and scenarios are so fundamental to human experience that they repeat in the dreams of different people without any direct connection. However, this explanation proves insufficient when the coincidences go beyond symbolism and become logistically complex. In the most extreme cases, information exchanges between dreamers have been documented that are later verified upon waking, as if a conversation really took place between minds in a common space. Another aspect that lends strength to this possibility is the phenomenon of recurrent shared spaces, dream places that appear again and again in the dreams of unrelated people. Among the best known is the so-called Infinite Hotel, a building with multiple floors, endless hallways, numbered rooms, and doors that never quite open. There are dozens of testimonies that describe this place with identical details, even those who claim to have accessed areas of the hotel that others mention afterward, as if it were a constantly expanding space to which different consciousnesses connect without knowing it. In the field of parapsychology, some researchers have suggested that dreaming functions as a kind of network, a mental mesh in which certain frequencies can spontaneously synchronize, as if human minds, in a dream state, were capable of connecting beyond the physical limitations of the body. This idea has been supported by numerous accounts of twins who claim to dream the same things simultaneously, couples who live parallel experiences during the night, or even groups who spontaneously coincide in complex plots that resemble a role-playing game without pre-established rules. A particularly striking example occurred in 2013, when a series of users on a forum specialized in lucid dreams began talking about a city called Nareva, a floating metropolis with black towers, rivers flowing upward, and an underground market inhabited by shape-changing beings. The descriptions were so coherent and vivid that someone started compiling the accounts and assembling a map, reconstructing the city from the dreams of dozens of people. Over time, meeting points were established within Nareva, a plaza with a light obelisk, a stone theater without a stage, a living library that changed its content according to the reader's emotion. Some participants claimed to have met other dreamers there, shared moments, created bonds, all within a space that does not physically exist, but has been explored by multiple minds in parallel. Official science has not yet been able to clearly explain these phenomena. Research on dreams, although advanced in terms of neurobiology, is still far from understanding what happens to consciousness when the body sleeps. We know the brain enters specific electrical cycles, activating areas related to memory, emotion, and imagination. But there is no model that can predict the appearance of shared dreams. Some scientists attribute them to coincidences, narrative pareidolia, or the spread of ideas through digital media. But the truth is that records of shared dreams exist from long before the internet, even from times when the only way to exchange ideas was orally or through writing. Ancient cultures gave great importance to dreams as vehicles of spiritual connection. In the tradition of Australian Aborigines, for example, the dream time is a parallel dimension where ancestors dwell and from which knowledge beyond everyday life can be accessed. In certain shamanic practices of Amazonian peoples, collective rituals are performed to dream together, to meet in that other plane where identity dissolves and only pure experience remains. These practices, far from mere superstitions, point to a broader vision of consciousness, one that is not limited to the individual self, but conceives it as part of a larger network. And perhaps that is the key to the mystery. That shared dreams are not system errors, nor mental anomalies, but manifestations of a deeper reality that we access when we set aside logic and physical boundaries. A space where the collective takes form, where minds touch in their most vulnerable and essential state, and where the impossible becomes direct experience. Not as hallucination, but as territory. If that is true, then dreaming together could be a primitive but powerful form of communication. A window to what we do not yet understand, but intuit. And if there is such a thing as a language of the collective unconscious, perhaps shared dreams are its first words. Words we do not yet fully know how to read, but that resonate with an ancient, silent, and deeply human truth. Because at night, when we close our eyes, we all travel, and some, perhaps unknowingly, do so along the same path. The Marfa Lights. In the vastness of the Texas desert, where the horizon unfolds like an ocean of dry earth, and the wind blows with an almost hypnotic constancy, there is a phenomenon that for more than a century has puzzled everyone fortunate, or bewildered, enough to witness it. These are the Marfa Lights, a mystery that needs no fireworks or cutting-edge technology to inspire awe, because its enigma lies precisely in the elemental. Lights that appear out of nowhere, in the darkness of the plain, floating, dancing, moving without any visible source or understandable cause. What is most perplexing is that these lights are not a modern legend or an illusion fueled by digital technology. The first reports date back to the late 19th century. In 1883, a young cowboy named Robert Ellison, while tending his cattle on the plateau near the present-day town of Marfa, witnessed bright lights emerging at dusk over the Chinati mountain range. Believing they were campfires of indigenous people or lost explorers, he cautiously approached, only to discover there was no trace of a camp, no signs of life, and no marks on the ground. The lights simply vanished. Over the years, the phenomenon began to be reported by more and more people: farmers, soldiers, travelers, even railroad engineers working on line expansions. They all agreed on the essentials. The lights were real, visible to the naked eye, and behaved erratically, as if they had a will of their own. They appeared and disappeared suddenly, sometimes in groups, sometimes alone, oscillating with smooth movements or performing impossible maneuvers. Some rose and faded into the sky. Others traveled across the surface at inexplicable speeds, even stopping abruptly, as if watching those who observed them. As time passed, the Marfa Lights evolved from a frontier tale to a cultural phenomenon. In the 40s and 50s, reports began to accumulate, attracting the attention of universities, independent researchers, and of course the military, especially during World War II, when nearby military installations took note of the sightings. For a moment, it was thought they might be some form of enemy espionage, but after years of surveillance and no evidence of terrestrial technology, that line of investigation was abandoned. What distinguishes this phenomenon from so many other accounts of unexplained lights is that it does not depend on oral storytelling. The Marfa Lights can be seen with one's own eyes, without intermediaries. From a specific road, Route 90, which crosses the desert heading toward Alpine, anyone, on the right nights, can stop, look south, and witness something science has yet to explain with certainty. And that persistence over time, that constancy without a definitive explanation, is what fuels the almost mystical aura of the phenomenon. Over the years, multiple scientific explanations have been proposed. Some point to atmospheric phenomena, light refraction over layers of hot air, thermal mirages, phosphorescent gases emitted from underground, or even static electricity discharges under specific conditions. Others claim the lights are distant car headlights distorted by the curvature of the terrain. This theory gained strength in the 2000s when a group of physics students from a Texas university conducted an experiment simulating the optical conditions of the area and managed to reproduce similar lights using vehicles several kilometers away. And yet, these explanations do not convince everyone. There are documented observations from decades before automobiles existed in the area. The lights do not always follow predictable patterns, and many witnesses claim to have seen them float over areas where there are no roads, no traffic, and no chance of human interference. Some even assert that the lights reacted to their presence, changing direction, approaching, and even splitting into multiple spheres before disappearing without a trace. The descriptions are too consistent and nuanced to be dismissed as mere optical illusions. At this point, the phenomenon takes on a deeper, almost metaphysical character. For some, the lights are a manifestation of residual energy, a kind of echo of past events, trapped in time, repeating night after night like a tape rewinding endlessly. For others, they are portals, points of contact between our world and another dimension. Many paranormal researchers have linked the Marfa Lights to so-called orbs, spheres of light that appear in places charged with spiritual energy. In certain esoteric traditions, these lights would be manifestations of non-physical entities, disembodied consciousnesses, or even guardians of sacred places. There are also bolder theories that connect the phenomenon with non-human technology. Some interpretations suggest the lights could be observation probes, similar to those described in certain close encounter accounts with unidentified flying objects. This idea gains traction when analyzing how these lights seem to defy known laws of physics, stopping abruptly, accelerating at impossible angles, or even disappearing mid-flight without any sound. The very environment of Marfa contributes to the magnetism of the phenomenon. It is a remote region, with open skies and clean air, where silence is so deep it seems to have volume. Nights there feel infinite, and any anomalous event is perceived with a particular emotional intensity. Perhaps that is why those who have witnessed the lights never forget them. It does not matter if they are skeptics, scientists, or casual travelers. The impression is unanimous. There is something there that does not fit, that cannot be reduced to a simple cause. And it is precisely this ambiguity that makes the Marfa Lights one of the purest mysteries that exist. There is no fraud, no hoax, no organization profiting from the phenomenon beyond tourist curiosity. There are no prophecies, no revelations, just lights. Lights that appear in the middle of the desert and remind us, by their mere existence, that there are still corners of reality we have not fully mapped. That even in a world saturated with sensors, satellites, and algorithms, we can still look to the horizon and find the inexplicable floating above the earth. In the end, the Marfa Lights do not need a definitive answer. Perhaps their purpose is not to be understood, but to provoke that unique moment when rational thought stops and something older, more visceral, awakens. A spark of wonder that does not fade with explanation, because it transcends the need to understand. It is a luminous reminder that mystery still lives among us, not hidden deep in the ocean or on the inaccessible peaks of the Himalayas, but right by the roadside, waiting to be seen by those who dare to look. the number 137. At the heart of physics, where equations intertwine with the very essence of the universe, there exists a number that has puzzled scientists, mystics, and philosophers alike. It is not just any number, nor does it represent an arbitrary constant, or the result of a simple empirical measurement. The number 137, more precisely, 1 divided by 137, or 1 over 137, is associated with one of the most fundamental constants of the cosmos, the fine structure constant. What makes it a true enigma is that this number should not have the value it does. Yet it does. It is as if, in the most intimate fabric of the universe, a code is imprinted, a mathematical fingerprint suggesting a deeper order, perhaps even an intention. For those unfamiliar with the technicalities of quantum physics, it is worth stating clearly. The fine structure constant, represented by the Greek letter A, alpha, determines the strength with which charged particles interact with each other, especially electrons and protons, through the electromagnetic force. It is a dimensionless number, which means it does not depend on any unit of measurement, and this makes it extremely peculiar. It is a universal constant, valid in any system, anywhere in the universe, and at any time. Its approximate value is 1 over 137.035999. A tiny fraction, yes, but absolutely critical. If that value were slightly different, even by a decimal, chemistry as we know it would not exist. Atoms would not form the same way. Light would interact with matter differently, and it is very likely that stars would not be able to ignite. In other words, if the number 137 were not exactly what it is, the universe would be radically different, perhaps even incompatible with life. It was the German physicist Arnold Sommerfeld who introduced this constant in 1916, refining Bohr's atomic model. But over time, the value of A ceased to be just a mathematical tool and began to acquire a kind of esoteric aura within the scientific community. Great minds like Wolfgang Pauli, Richard Feynman, and Arthur Eddington became obsessed with the number 137. Pauli, in fact, was so intrigued by this number that he spoke of it in almost mystical terms. In his final years, he collaborated with Carl Gustav Jung, exploring synchronicity, convinced that there was a deep connection between numbers, the human mind, and the fundamental laws of the cosmos. According to some sources, Pauli died in a hospital room numbered 137. Richard Feynman, one of the most influential physicists of the 20th century, expressed it with a mixture of astonishment and irony. It is one of the greatest damn mysteries of physics, a magic number that comes out of nowhere. If extraterrestrials ever come, they will probably ask us, "Have you discovered what 137 means yet?" Because no one knows why it is like this. There is no theory explaining it from first principles. It is simply there, measured, verified, accepted, but not understood. And here is where the mystery begins to grow. Because the number 137 does not only appear in the equations of electromagnetism, some researchers have noticed its presence in unexpected places. In the geometry of DNA, for example, there are proportional relationships that refer to this number. In certain structures of harmonic music, divisions have been identified that refer, although indirectly, to its fraction. Even in ancient Hebrew numerology systems, the number 137 holds special meaning. In Kabbalah, it represents the numerical value of the word Kabbalah, the mystical tradition, which has led some to speculate about a possible convergence between science and spirituality. Arthur Eddington, another great thinker of the last century, proposed that the number 137 was a kind of cosmic key, a constant that should contain the ultimate secret of the universe's structure. He was so convinced of this that he embarked on an almost obsessive quest to derive its exact value from purely mathematical reasons, although his results were not widely accepted by the scientific community. Still, His intuition that this number hides something more than what appears at first glance continues to resonate with those attracted to the great mysteries of the universe. Some bolder theorists have even proposed that 137 is not a natural constant, but a kind of design mark. In other words, its presence implies such a precise fine-tuning that it cannot be explained without invoking the idea of an organizing mind, a cosmic intelligence that set the rules of the game so exactly that the very existence of atoms, light, and consciousness is possible. This idea, which flirts with the so-called anthropic principle, holds that the universe does not just allow life by chance, but has been configured so that life eventually arises. And if that is the case, then the number 137 would be something like a hidden code, a password engraved in physics itself. But the mystery does not end there. Some cosmologists have warned that if other fundamental constants change over time, as seems to be the case with the gravitational constant or even the Hubble constant, could the value of alpha also have been different in the earliest moments of the universe? And what would that imply for our understanding of the origins of everything? There are studies suggesting slight variations of the value 1/137 in certain astronomical observations of distant galaxies, sparking a new debate about the constancy of this constant. And if it were ever proven that the value of alpha has changed, even minimally, that would mean the rules of the universe are not fixed, that the game could be evolving, or even that there are other universes with their own versions of 137. Some authors link this number to theories of multiple dimensions. According to certain models derived from string theory, constants like alpha could be projections of more complex relationships occurring in higher dimensions we do not directly perceive. In that scenario, 137 would be a shadow, an impression of a more complex mathematical architecture hidden behind the veil of our three-dimensional perception. As if what we today believe to be fundamental were only the tip of a vast iceberg whose mass extends into invisible dimensions. The fact that a simple number gathers so many layers of meaning, so many scientific obsessions, and so many cultural coincidences makes it much more than a mathematical curiosity. It is a silent but constant presence at the foundations of reality. And the more one tries to decipher it, the more it resists. As if it were playing with us, as if it were telling us, "You are not ready to know yet." Because there are numbers used to count, to weigh, to calculate. But there are others, very few, that seem to have a life of their own, that are not content with being part of an equation, that demand to be understood not only with logic, but with intuition, with wonder, even with a dose of reverence. And perhaps 137 is precisely that, a mathematical warning. A sign that what we believe we know about the universe is barely a fraction of something much vaster. A reminder, in the form of a number, that even the most solid, science, reason, certainty, still has gaps through which mystery slips. And in that space, right between what we know and what we barely glimpse, 137 remains, silent and eternal, like a figure written by the universe itself in the margin of its most secret book. The Whispers of Skinwalker Ranch. In a remote corner of northeastern Utah, where the arid landscape stretches like a tapestry of silence, barely broken by the hum of wind among the rocks and the distant murmur of some nocturnal creature, lies a piece of land that for decades has been marked as an epicenter of the unexplainable. It is known as Skinwalker Ranch, although its name is merely a gateway to the abyss of phenomena that manifest there. What happens there does not respond to a single cause, nor can it be confined to a specific category. It is as if that land exists outside of time, trapped in a crack where dimensions that normally should remain separate converge. From livestock mutilations performed with surgical precision, to appearances of lights in the sky that defy physical laws, to the presence of invisible entities that seem to watch without being seen. Skinwalker Ranch has become one of the densest and most baffling cases in the history of modern mystery. But its origin is not recent. The roots of this place sink deep into Navajo folklore, where it is said that the land was cursed during an ancient conflict between tribes. According to this tradition, the Navajo invoked dark forces to punish their enemies, the Ute, thus condemning the region to be inhabited by skinwalkers, witches who, through forbidden rituals, managed to take animal forms to stalk the living. For generations, stories about sightings of shape-shifting creatures, strange disappearances, and anomalous environmental behaviors were passed down by word of mouth as warnings that local inhabitants preferred not to challenge. It was in the 1990s that the mystery leapt into the public sphere. The Sherman family acquired the property with the aim of establishing a cattle breeding farm. But barely settled, the Shermans began experiencing a series of events that defied any logic. One of the first documented incidents was that of a gigantic wolf, much larger than any known canine, which appeared on the ranch grounds. The animal approached humans without fear, and after attacking one of the cattle, was shot multiple times at close range, but showed no visible injury. According to Terry Sherman's own testimony, the wolf calmly withdrew, and after following its tracks for a few meters, the footprints simply vanished into thin air. But that was only the beginning. Gradually, the family witnessed increasingly intense phenomena: lights floating over the fields, inexplicable hums emanating from the ground, objects disappearing instantly, voices seeming to arise from nowhere. The cows began to appear mutilated, with clean cuts, organs removed, and not a single drop of blood at the scene. In some cases, the corpses were still warm, as if the event had occurred seconds before. Nothing in the area indicated a struggle. No footprints, no signs of predators. Only emptiness. Overwhelmed by the intensity of these events, the Shermans sold the ranch in 1996 to businessman Robert Bigelow, founder of an organization dedicated to studying anomalous phenomena called the National Institute for Discovery Science, NIDS. With private funding, Bigelow installed measuring equipment, sensors, night vision cameras, and a permanent team of investigators on the ranch with the goal of scientifically recording what was happening there. Despite years of constant observation, the results were largely as baffling as the phenomena themselves. Electromagnetic anomalies were reported that affected devices, fluctuating magnetic fields without apparent cause, unexplained underground sounds, and lights that, although visible to the human eye, seemed to systematically evade cameras. The nature of the phenomena was volatile, elusive, almost as if whatever manifested there had the ability to anticipate human attempts to capture or understand it. Some investigators reported experiencing physical symptoms: intense headaches, nausea, temporary loss of orientation, and even episodes of memory loss. One claimed to have seen an opening in the sky, a kind of window, through which a dark bipedal creature emerged, then disappeared into the brush without a trace. The team, however, was unable to obtain conclusive evidence of the incident. After years of fruitless investigation, NIDS withdrew. The mystery remained intact. The ranch's next chapter began with the purchase of the property by Brandon Fugel, a real estate magnate who launched a new cycle of explorations, this time without hiding the activity from the public. The ranch became the epicenter of a documentary series in which a new team of scientists, engineers, and technicians documented phenomena similar to those described by previous occupants. Radiation without a detectable source, unexplained electrical failures, drones disappearing from radar just meters above the ground, and a constant, almost suffocating pressure many described as the feeling of being watched by something that cannot be named. Some theorists propose that the ranch is located over a kind of energy crossroads, a telluric node, an intersection of force lines that, under certain conditions, would allow the manifestation of interdimensional phenomena. Others suggest it is a space intervened by unknown technologies, perhaps not human. And there are those who return to the roots, those who believe the ranch remains a cursed territory, where the sacred and the profane coexist in a permanent tension that modern man can barely begin to understand. What is unsettling is that, unlike other places famous for being haunted, What occurs at Skinwalker Ranch does not follow the logic of traditional ghostly apparitions. There is no specific story of murder, nor a single traumatic event that explains the manifestations. Here, the mystery is cumulative, persistent, without a defined narrative, as if the land itself harbored a distinct consciousness prior to humanity. A consciousness that observes, that plays, that evades rational explanation like a fish in water, always about to be caught, but never fully. Perhaps that is why locals call it the whispers of the ranch, because what manifests there rarely does so with noise. They are whispers, echoes of something else, an invisible touch, a shadow that slips by the corner of the eye and disappears before one can focus on it. A silent presence that does not need to introduce itself, because it is already there, and always has been. Because at Skinwalker Ranch, it is not about what you see, but what you feel, and what you feel often never leaves you. Lake Vostok, an isolated reality beneath the ice, in the most inhospitable heart of the planet, where temperatures can plunge to unimaginable levels, where the wind blows like a breath from another world, and the vast white expanse becomes a silent abyss. There exists a place as hidden as it is disturbing. Lake Vostok, buried under almost 4 kilometers of Antarctic ice, has remained sealed off from the rest of the planet for more than 15 million years. Neither sunlight has touched its waters, nor the air we breathe has brushed its surface. There, in that eternal darkness, time seems to have stopped, or worse, taken a path completely different from the known world. What is baffling about Lake Vostok is not only its location or its difficult access, but the fact that it exists. The ice covering it should have frozen it completely, yet the lake remains liquid. The reason lies in the geothermal heat emanating from the Antarctic subsoil, a constant energy source that prevents the water from solidifying. This circumstance has created a microcosm completely isolated from the rest of the Earth's biosphere, a natural laboratory that has remained intact for longer than humanity has walked the Earth. For decades, its existence was only a suspicion. In the 1950s, the Soviets established the Vostok research station right above the area that, decades later, would be confirmed as a subglacial lake of astonishing dimensions. It was through seismic measurements and satellite altimetry that, in the 1990s, it was established with certainty that beneath the station extended a body of fresh water over 200 kilometers long. But the truly unsettling part did not begin with the discovery itself, but with the idea that this liquid mass, sealed for millions of years under the planet's most hostile ice, could harbor life. Not just any life, of course. Not fish like those swimming in rivers, nor algae like those floating near coasts. We are talking about life forms that would have evolved completely isolated from the rest of the planet, exposed to extremely high pressures, sub-zero temperatures, and total darkness. Living beings for which our biological categories might not apply. When in 2012, a Russian expedition finally managed to drill through the ice layer and access the lake, the expectations were enormous. This represented the opportunity to observe how life behaves in a closed, untouched environment. A pristine ecosystem that could resemble the environments existing beneath the surface of moons like Europa or Enceladus. The samples extracted quickly surprised researchers. Microbial structures were identified that, while sharing some characteristics with terrestrial bacteria, also presented genetic sequences that did not match any known organism. There was even talk of life forms that could be completely new to science. This news was met with a mix of enthusiasm, skepticism, and, for some, fear. Because the pressing question was not whether life existed in the lake, but what kind of life it was, and how it had managed to adapt to such extreme conditions. What kind of evolution had taken place in an environment where biological time did not follow common rules? What secrets could be hidden in that pressurized water, completely alien to sunlight? From there, theories began to emerge. Some scientists suggested the possibility of finding extremophile organisms that could provide new clues to understanding the origin of life on Earth, or even the possibility of life on other planets. Others went further, speculating that Lake Vostok might contain multicellular biological structures, complex organisms that, thanks to extreme isolation, would have followed divergent evolutionary paths since prehistoric times. But there were also more unsettling voices, warning about the risks of disturbing such a deeply sealed environment. What would happen if what lives there could not coexist with the outside world? And if what lies in that lake were not simply biological, but something completely alien to our conception of nature? Conspiracy theories were not lacking. Some claimed that after the drilling, the researchers had found not only microbial life, but physical structures, perhaps remains of an ancient civilization, or even technologies buried since before the last glaciation. There were those who said that communication with part of the drilling team had been lost, or that certain reports had been hidden by the governments involved. The atmosphere of secrecy surrounding the missions following the discovery only fueled speculation. Everything seemed to indicate that in Vostok there was more than was being said. The lake became a sort of Antarctic Aleph, a point where mystery and science collided strongly, leaving behind more questions than answers. To what extent can we intervene in a completely isolated ecosystem without irreversibly altering it? What implications would finding independent life, arisen without contact with the rest of the planet, have? And what consequences could releasing into the outside world something that has evolved completely apart from our ecosystem, perhaps with biochemical mechanisms incompatible with any known form of life? Lake Vostok remains largely intact. The drillings have been careful, limited, and access has been strictly regulated. But the mere fact that we have reached its liquid surface has already changed something. The possibility that the lake has begun to react to that contact, that its microorganisms are now facing a new kind of pressure, that of our presence, opens a new chapter in this still unfolding story. It is unsettling to think that, in a world mapped to the smallest corner, there are still places beyond our gaze. But even more unsettling is to know that beneath our feet, there may pulse a life unlike anything we know. A life that reminds us that Earth is stranger than we dare to imagine. In this sense, Lake Vostok is more than a geographic phenomenon or a scientific challenge. It is a door. And although for now we have only cracked it open slightly, what lies beyond could redefine our vision of the planet, or even of ourselves. Because sometimes the most unknown is not in outer space, but in the deep innards of our own world, patiently waiting to be discovered. The invisible towers. In certain regions of the planet, far from tourist circuits, beyond conventional maps and almost always surrounded by nature indifferent to the passage of humans, a phenomenon repeats itself that puzzles those who witness it and has, over time, become established in the shadows of mystery. The invisible towers. We are not talking about technological structures designed to blend with the landscape, nor about mirages caused by extreme weather conditions. Rather, it is the momentary, intermittent, and utterly inexplicable appearance of buildings that seem to arise from nowhere, remain suspended in space for brief moments, and then vanish as if they had never been there. Descriptions vary depending on the witness and the place in the world where they are reported. But there are elements that recur with unsettling frequency. They speak of slender towers, sometimes with geometries that defy known architectural rules, often lacking windows, doors, or decorative details, as if their purpose were not human, as if they were conceived with a different logic, under other rules. Some claim that these towers appear amidst dense fog or during moments of deep silence, just before dawn, or when the atmosphere seems charged with electricity. In other accounts, they manifest on the edges of ancient rural paths or in mountainous landscapes, far from any sign of civilization. There are those who suggest these manifestations do not entirely belong to our dimension. The theory of parallel worlds has gained ground among researchers of the unexplained, And within this framework, the invisible towers could be fleeting intersections between our plane and a deeper, more alien one, where these constructions exist permanently and tangibly. When both realities collide, for reasons still unknown, part of that architecture briefly projects into our world, like a reflection, like a shadow that does not correspond to the object that generates it. There are also ancient testimonies, because although attempts have been made to link this phenomenon to modern technological errors or optical illusions generated by electromagnetic fields, there are records dating back centuries. In chronicles by medieval monks, for example, towers are mentioned that rose over fields on foggy days, only to disappear when approached. In 8th century Arabic texts, shining columns are described rising from the horizon on moonless nights, motionless, silent, like guardians of some distant secret. Even in pre-Columbian indigenous accounts, there is mention of structures not visible to profane eyes, which suggests that the phenomenon is not only global, but also transcends time. Science, as expected, offers rational explanations, although none fully satisfactory. Some meteorologists have proposed that certain very specific atmospheric conditions, such as thermal inversion or light refraction over cold air masses, could generate mirror images of distant objects, projecting them into the sky as if they were real and nearby. However, these explanations collapse when accounts agree that no nearby structures could have been reflected, or when witnesses claim to have seen the towers from different angles, and for several minutes before they suddenly vanished, leaving no trace. Other researchers more inclined to experimental approaches have considered that these sightings might be related to fluctuations in human perception. That is, it is not reality that changes, but our senses that, for some still misunderstood reason, temporarily adjust to another frequency of existence. It would be something like an accidental synchronization with another layer of reality, a kind of perceptual slip that allows one to see what normally remains hidden. This approach has been explored by neuroscientists studying altered states of consciousness, such as those induced by certain shamanic practices or near-death experiences, in which subjects claim to have seen impossible structures or landscapes. What disturbs most about these testimonies is the emotional component that accompanies them. Those who claim to have witnessed one of these towers agree that the experience goes beyond the visual. They speak of a feeling of intrusion, as if they had seen something they should not have seen, as if, by contemplating them, they had glimpsed a truth too vast to comprehend. Some describe an overwhelming sensation of peace, as if the entire world had stopped during those seconds. Others, however, talk about anguish, a pressure in the chest, an inner voice warning them to leave immediately. There are also lesser-known reports, almost buried among declassified files or marginal reports, that suggest these towers could be associated with other anomalies. The appearance of invisible towers has been documented in areas where unexplained power outages, disruptions in navigation devices, loss of perceived time, and even temporary disappearances of animals or people have also been recorded. These cases, although difficult to verify, feed the idea that the phenomenon is not isolated, but part of something larger, more complex, possibly linked to the very structure of our reality. The absence of material evidence has not diminished interest. In fact, the ephemeral and elusive nature of these towers is precisely what makes them so fascinating. Because we are used to seeking tangible answers, photographs, remains, traces, yet there are phenomena that resist that kind of evidence. The invisible towers, like so many other true mysteries, do not let themselves be caught. They cannot be studied in laboratories, nor subjected to rigorous scientific protocols. They are like marginal notes of reality, brief signals that the world, as we understand it, is barely a fraction of what is really happening. Ultimately, the question is not what these towers are, but what they are telling us. Are they warning us of something? Are they remnants of a world before ours, still trying to communicate? Or are they simply the visual echo of another universe that sometimes brushes ours with the tips of its fingers? perhaps we will never know. But next time you walk through a lonely valley, under thick mist, or feel the air around you change texture for no apparent reason, look to the horizon. Perhaps, just for a moment, you will manage to see a slender silhouette rising toward the sky, like a tower that exists only for those willing to see it. The last observer of the edge. There is a place you do not reach by accident. It is not on maps nor marked by signs. It is located at an abstract point of reality, a boundary not geographical but existential, where perception begins to give way to the unknown, and the sense of direction dissolves like fog in the sun. There, according to certain stories that recur hauntingly across cultures, eras, and continents, dwells an enigmatic figure known only as the last observer of the edge. It is not a formal name, nor a figure with clear genealogy or origin. It is rather a title given by those who claim to have seen it, or felt it, or simply intuited it. It appears in accounts as a silent guardian watching the limits of the real, as if its presence were necessary to keep the layers of the world that should never have touched apart. It does not communicate, does not intervene, leaves no tangible trace. Its function seems to be simply to exist, to be there, on the last line, at the very edge of human understanding. The earliest records that refer to an entity with these characteristics do not belong to scientific treatises or religious documents, but to personal testimonies, many of which were considered madness or delirium. Yet, when one begins to compare the stories, despite the temporal and geographical distances, patterns emerge. A solitary walker, a human figure, or almost human, appearing on the horizon during extreme explorations, whether in empty deserts, lonely peaks, or deep forests where silence becomes dense. Different witnesses, with no connection among them, describe the same type of encounter, and all agree on a fundamental feeling: the certainty that what they were seeing should not have been there. In many of these testimonies, the last observer appears without warning. There are no footsteps, no sounds, no tracks. It materializes at some distance, always motionless, and remains still for the duration of the observation. It never approaches. It never reacts. It simply watches. And in that act of observation, something difficult to describe happens. Those who have seen it claim they felt a pressure on their chest, as if the air became denser or more real. In some cases, they describe an intense flow of thoughts, visions, or memories that did not belong to them, as if that figure could project images inside their minds, as if the mere fact of being observed connected them to something greater, older, more incomprehensible. In some ancient texts preserved in dark libraries and forgotten monasteries, the figure of the Watcher of the Margins is mentioned, and although the name varies, the essence is the same. It is the one who waits at the end of the paths, the one who watches the abyss from the other side. In a letter found among the papers of a 16th century Portuguese navigator, a thin man with pale skin and very black eyes is described, who appeared during a journey across the South Atlantic, standing on a small island not listed on nautical charts. The navigator described him as the expressionless face looking from the edge of the world. Days later, the entire crew disappeared. Only the letter, wrinkled and salt-stained, reached its destination. Science does not speak on these matters, not because it is uninterested, but because it cannot grasp them. The last observer cannot be caged, measured, or photographed. Its presence is always subjective, intimate, transformative. Yet some have tried to study it through philosophy, deep psychology, even quantum physics, theorizing that perhaps this figure is not external, but a manifestation of consciousness when it reaches an absolute limit. A kind of universal archetype that activates when a human being approaches mental or physical territories where the structure of reality begins to crack. In other words, the last observer would be a threshold, a personification of the edge, The end, the exact moment when the soul understands it has crossed into the unknown. It could be the echo of something beyond the real, even beyond language. A way of telling us that there is no turning back. There is something deeply unsettling about this idea, because deep down, we have all felt at some point the presence of a gaze whose origin we do not know. That feeling that someone is watching us, even when we are alone. The shiver that runs down the spine for no apparent reason. The urge to turn your head and find nothing. What if those sensations are not hallucinations or nervous system responses, but signs that something, or someone, watches us from the other side? What if the last observer is closer than we imagine? In recent years, some extreme explorers, especially those venturing into unexplored places in the Arctic, the Amazon, or Tibet, have documented strange experiences. Sensations of dissociation, temporary loss of self, visions of human figures that vanish in a blink. A Canadian researcher described having found a perfectly motionless person on the edge of a cliff, more than 500 kilometers from the nearest human settlement. He tried to photograph it, but his camera failed. When he looked down to adjust the lens and looked back, the figure was gone. These are not proofs, but they are clues. And sometimes, clues are all we have to build narratives that explain what slips through the fingers of logic. Perhaps the last observer is a real entity. Perhaps it is a symbol. Perhaps it is a collective projection of our fear of limits, of crossing too far and not being able to return. Perhaps it is a warning or a welcome. The truth is, as long as the desire to go further exists, to push the boundary one step beyond, to look where no one else has looked, the last observer will remain there. Silent, motionless, witness to our deepest questions. And whoever sees it, whoever finds it in that perfect moment between reason and the abyss, may understand something that cannot be conveyed in words, something that is neither taught nor learned, something that is only experienced once on the last curve of the world. And then it disappears. If any of these stories resonated with you, if any left you thinking or simply gave you goosebumps, let me know in the comments. I want to read which mystery impacted you the most, or which one you think is real. See you in the next story. Rest if you can. Good night.